Greetings, brothers and sisters. This is Sunday, August 6th. Yesterday I put out a video about Jojo Magoo basically trying to repeal this First Amendment. And it had to do with RFK as well. And I received one comment, which I'll read in a moment. I want to do an introduction first. And it's about RFK's disturbing comments about Palestine and the Palestinians and the conflict with Israel. Like I said, I'll get to all that in a moment. And I want to start here. This is Glenn Beck, who's gained some weight. He always sucked. And now I think he just sucks on the internet. He used to suck on Fox. But here he said this about being black-pilled.
America, there is a psyop going on right now in this country, and you are the target. It just might be the most dangerous thing in the country right now. Why? Well, because it attacks your mind. It diminishes your ability to ask questions and ultimately hold those in power accountable for what they're doing. Have you ever heard of the phrase blackpilling? It is defined, quote, as a mindset characterized by extreme pessimism, cynicism, and futility.
All right, so that's enough of Glenn. So I was going to cover this on today's video. I already put out a video today on the, my other channel, Apocalypse Now. And I got that video done early, and looks like it's going to rain outside, so I got some extra time. And this black-pilled thing is, a little bit of an introduction to the Kennedy stuff. And so many of you have referred to me as black-pilled, and I kind of understood what that meant. But, in terms of Glenn Beck's definition, which might be different than the truther definition, but it certainly isn't categorized what I do here. In fact, mine is, my position is oppositional to the idea of being black-pilled. See, the idea of being black-pilled comes from the belief that the controllers have so much power that the system is doomed. At least this is how Glenn Beck is phrasing it here. And my understanding about it before, and I don't know, it's probably got many definitions, is the idea that the system is rigged in such a way and is corrupted in such a way that it can't be saved. Not that it is some pessimistic view that the people who are controlling the system are running some sort of psychological operation to get you to see the futility of existence or this system and trying to fix it. So you don't even try. You don't vote. You don't participate. You say it's never going to change, and you just become complacent. And that's what Glenn Beck was saying. And the general consensus or the general view in the truth community is that people think the system is rigged in such a way and is corrupted and is such a broken system or such a demonic system that it should collapse and there's no way of fixing it or divinizing it, which is partially what I believe. But what sets my belief apart, and it's really in a sense a hopeful belief or a faithful belief, is that the system being a demonic system and leading us in the wrong direction has to collapse, and it should collapse. But there is a counter movement, a spiritual movement on the other side. That there is a plan, there's contingencies, there's a movement for divinity, there's a God-created plan to resurrect or redeem the human race. And so it's actually a positive idea. And it's not giving up, because in your life in your life or my life, there's opportunity for us to grow spiritually, no matter what the circumstances. No matter what abusive situation we've been born into, no matter what hopeless predicaments our future has and whatever our future holds, our collective future, as our individual futures, no matter, whether you're in a war-torn country or you're going through trauma and peril and difficulties and, starvation and whatever it might be. There's always the chance to grow spiritually. There's always the chance to evolve spiritually. So there's always something positive you can do. There's always some work you can be doing. In fact, you're always working if you're following your soul's path. That your soul has created the circumstances it's chosen for you to be born in this, in this body, in this life, this circumstance. The things that befall you are there for your benefit, the challenges, and they're there for you to move closer to God and move farther along your spiritual path. So it's always a hopeful type of view. I don't like the word hope, and hope is something where you can have false hope. Having hope for something that's doomed, to me, is pointless and a negative thing. So I don't like the word hope. I don't like the word pride. But in my view, and the view of the Sage-Mark system, the Sage-Mark system teaches these things, but I've experienced these things personally, right? I believe them, based in my faith in the Sage-Mark system of meditation and spiritual evolution. But experiencing them is always better. And I know what the system's about. I've seen the issues. When the system, when they closed the economic system, they closed down the economy because of COVID, that was the point of no return. All systems are doomed to die. Everything dies on planet Earth. Everything evolves and changes, and everything dies. Everything has an ending point, a beginning point, an ending point. And so our system's just like that. And our system was, doomed by its own inefficiency, its own, depravity, being away from the divine will, all these things. But until they closed down the economy, there was always a chance that they could fudge the numbers for a longer extended period of time. They've been fudging the numbers. The system should have collapsed because of the debt, the overwhelming debt, the amount of money that we could produce and the amount of income we could generate will never catch up to the debt. And I've showed you the debt clock before, and I'm not going to go into that here, but I've talked about that so much. But when they closed down the economy, they were basically saying, yeah, we know it's never going to catch up, and whatever we're doing now is to create a circumstance where we do damage control and we take things from people and collapse things. And they were no longer pretending that they could provide you with the lifestyle that you feel like you've been promised, and they have, in fact, promised to you that your lifestyle was just going to stay as good or get continuously better. At least it was going to be offered up to people who aspired to work for it. But now they're just like, yeah, that's not happening. And so it's, them admitting that the system is collapsed, and they're now doing whatever they're going to do to try to save something on the other end for themselves, which ultimately will fail. But that's what their attempt is. And even with that, right, the system should collapse. And when you're looking at your own personal circumstances, your own selfish, egotistical life, and, I talk about the promise that was made to our ancestors to leave the farm and leave their skills behind. And the system that was created, the system we are now dependent on, was always going to be there for them. And they were never going to need their skills and all these things they left behind, and we've left behind generations ago. And now we need those skills. So, for all of us, especially if you're older and so many people are bankrupt and they're just, assed out. They don't have anything in their tank. It's completely terrifying to think about the system that you're 100% dependent on dying. And I talk about this quite often. But what I don't say so much, and I don't know if I've said this before, the damage that you're doing to yourself spiritually through this hedonistic system, this failed experiment, and the damage that we're doing to the planet and the future that we're creating for ourselves, first future versions of ourselves. When you understand the idea of reincarnation being a real thing, you're going to have to come back here and deal with not only what you've left behind in terms of the material world, what the material world is like, but all the things you've taken with you in terms of samskaras and these other things. People would be a lot more agreeable to the system collapsing if you knew what we were going to have to face and how you're screwing yourself and future versions of yourself and other people, your children, grandchildren. We're just putting the future into a bad situation, future human beings into a bad situation. And I'm saying all this because my support of Kennedy, I think people have misunderstood what I'm saying. Because we have a fundamental disagreement, myself and Kennedy and many of you, that the system can be saved and it should be saved. And it clearly should not be saved. It's a bad system. And it clearly can't be saved. But there's, people who have to believe what they have to believe. And I don't begrudge Kennedy or you trying to save the system if that's what your role is. If you're not doing it out of fear or desperation, but you're doing it because it's your soul's path, then great. And I think it's Kennedy's soul's path, so I'm not against it, and I support it, right? Whatever he's doing, that's good things. And he has done a number of good things, and those good things didn't get erased by his comments about Palestine. He did things professionally. He sued companies. He sued Monsanto. He sued polluters in the Hudson River area. He sued pharmaceutical companies, a number of companies. And he's done good work on the material plane of existence in terms of the legal system and some of these other things. It's, it's positive work. It's good work, right? And, I don't do those kind of things and believe in those things because of my idea that spiritual work is more important and, my view on the system itself. And I couldn't do that work anyway. So, the people who are willing to do it and have a real effect, I'm all for it. And since he's been running for president, he's been, in a way, he's been an advocate for the truth community. He's suing YouTube and Google for censorship, which, nobody's been able to do effectively. And he's caused the Biden administration to come out and say they're against the First Amendment, which is great. He's forcing the Democratic Party to rig the election earlier. And, he's bringing out truth and things like this. He's done a good job of talking about certain topics and things. Many of those things we all agree with. He's great on the, on the anti-boop. And, I know that he says he's not anti-boop, but, he'd be better than any other candidate right now. And so it doesn't diminish his work. And yet, he's a politician in a hopeless situation. And best case scenario is he gets elected. Maybe this isn't the best case, but he gets elected and they harass him constantly like they do to Trump. And they accuse him of things. This is their playbook. And they just get everything stuck in, deadlock. There's no real bills or laws or things changing. And he spends all his time just fighting all these smears and all these things. We see that they did this with Trump. Not that Trump is legitimate because Trump's owned in his own right, but that's how the Trump presidency went. And anybody that challenges the power or doesn't do exactly what the powers that be say, this is what they do. And they have a way of controlling all these things. They have a game plan. And so he's not going to change anything. And I've been saying that since the beginning. And he's not a saint. He's not a spiritual. He's not somebody that you would follow. You're not going to give your heart to this guy. Whether he's a lawyer and he's a politician and he's a, wealthy man. And, he's not a savior. And, when he gets attacked, if you invest in him, like many people are, you're going to be disappointed. If they kill him, you're going to be sad. If they, probably be sad no matter what because of, what it represents. But the more you invest in him, the more it's going to take its toll on you. And every time he gets attacked, you're going to feel like you're getting attacked, right? And so these Palestinian comments, I think, are a good thing because it puts it in perspective. And I'm going to go through the comments and show how bad it is in a moment. But I want to, preface it a little bit here. Not to excuse it or not to defend it, but just to give you all a reality check. People who now hate Kennedy and people who still love him or whatever it is, just a reality check. He is a, person, a human being with his own problems, his own struggles. And, his being authentic is what's won people over to him. But to be a good politician and get elected, he's going to have to do things that are either inauthentic or, some things you just got to hold your nose and do them in politics just to survive or whatever. Like I don't have to do that and you don't have to do that. And, what I would say he's good at, other than the things that he's accomplished already, is that there's no organization in the truth community. We're not organized. We don't have a lobbying group. We can't come together consistently or cohesively and create some kind of a movement, right? People protest, but that doesn't do anything. Most of the times when truthers get together and try to do some sort of work together, it backfires miserably. You saw that with the woke movement, the BLM movement, and you saw it also with the QB movement. Again, these are not really truthers, but they're going against the official story. But in general, truthers don't work together well, and we don't have the means to create a cohesive movement and do something together to change things. And there just isn't, ever been any real work that we're doing here to affect the system. Kennedy's been able to do this by litigating some of these things and creating some sort of an organization behind him. But there isn't enough truthers to get him elected. He can't go full truther, and you really can't. And the more you embrace the truth movement, the more that they use it to attack you. And so he has to do some things. He has to take, he can't fight everybody, and, he has his own issues, right? And I'm going to be critical of what he said about the Palestinians because it's that bad. And, it kind of undermines his credibility. So, I'm going to be critical about that. But I want to, taper that in the idea that we all suck, right? Like everybody who's in the truth community, everybody in the world sucks to one degree or another. We suck because we're dependent on the system. We suck because we're not trying to connect to God or working to connect to God as much as we should be. We suck for a variety of reasons. And people in the truth community have this really annoying habit of holding other people to a higher standard than they hold themselves. And if somebody doesn't believe what you believe, more often than not, you get completely butthurt and you call the person names and you call the person a shill and, all these other things, right? And, you don't acknowledge the work that Kennedy has done here, even though he has, again, done something or said something and his beliefs on Palestine are just so wrong and so off base that you'll throw him away and, you just say, oh, he's just a part of the thing or whatever. And you don't really have any proof, but that's how truthers do. And I understand my own limitations, and I'm not doing anything to try to change the system. And so, in terms of what you believe is what you believe, as long as it doesn't affect me. The QBs have affected me. There are groups and their belief systems that have made it harder and worse for all of us, right? And that's why I talk about them. But in terms of your beliefs, you have to find your own path. You have to figure out your own, path towards truth or whatever, spiritual realization or whatever your goal is in life. And so I'm not really bummed by him saying this. It is a bummer what he said, but I'm not bummed because, I never expected him to be a savior. I never expected him to be more than he is, right? And he has had a positive effect, and I assume he will continue doing so. But we have to understand that, he grew up in a rich family, and, he's all truthers have difference in opinions and things like this. And for whatever reason, he decided to talk about this Palestinian thing and expose his beliefs. And to all of us in the truth community that know anything about this, we know it's just BS. And so let's get started here. I first want to start with a comment so people can understand where I'm coming from on this. Okay, so this is pretty self-explanatory. So I had a video entitled Pox of the Future now has a membership option. And the person says, Jew. To me, that's their reaction, right? And so I have in the past had various people accuse me of being Jewish, which I kind of thought it was funny in the beginning and then just stupid and then just kind of annoying because I know I'm not. Like I knew I grew up Catholic. I know that there's no Jewish people in my family, in my ancestry, and all of my grandparents were Catholic. One was Albanian, one was Sicilian, one was German, and one was Irish. And all of them were Catholic in terms of my ancestral religion, but I'm no longer Catholic. I grew up as a Catholic, but now I do Saj Marg. I don't have a religion. I have a spiritual practice, and I don't consider myself a Catholic, someone who was raised Catholic, but not a Catholic now. And my ethnic ancestry is my ethnic ancestry. And so people accusing me of this, and I don't even think it's an accusation. It's more of a, something that's, I don't want to call it anti-Semitic, but it's hostile and, just wrong and stupid, right? And I've had to deal with these people coming to my channel, the Jew-hating people that hate Jews. And they suck. They suck for all of us. They cause problems here on levels that are, in terms of censorship and just making the truth community worse. It's one of the bad groups of the truth community that makes it worse for everybody. Because it takes no personal responsibility for you and your demographic and your group for making things worse. Because you just blame everything on the Jews. And I've said before, there are things that the Jewish community has created in terms of inventions and economic things. There's things that they're responsible for that you enjoy, that you use on a daily basis. There are things that they've contributed to our society, and you're not giving those things up. Like you say that you hate Jews, but you still use things that they've contributed in our society. And so there's a total lack of responsibility. If you blame one group or another, you blame the blacks or the white guys like it is now, or you blame, one demographic or another for all the world's problems, and you take no responsibility for you and your demographic or you as a person, and realize that you have to change. You expect these other people, these bad people, have to change. And so that just wrecks the truth community because it's dishonest. You're not confronting yourself and your own beliefs and your own contribution to the negativity, right? And every country has contributed, every culture and country has contributed something good, some good things and some bad things to our current situation. And, I'm going to get into my, I don't love Israel, right? I'm not an Israel fan. And in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I clearly, for me, it's obvious that the Palestinians are the victims in that conflict. They're not the aggressors, which is what Kennedy says. But I want to make it clear that this isn't some, place that you can verbalize your hate for Jewish people or whatever it is. I have friends who are Jewish. The guy who started me in Sajmarg was American-born Jewish person, American citizen who was formerly a Jewish person. He had transcended his religion. That's what you do when you start doing Sajmarg, seriously, or you do something spiritual seriously where you transcend your religion. You go from where a third party, an organization, is between you and God, and where you're connected directly to God, where you have an internal connection. You find God inside yourself. That's being a spiritual person. And when you do that, you transcend your religion because your religion isn't about that, right? You go beyond your religion. And that's what this guy did. But he was, he came from Jewish ancestors. I had friends in my college years and when I grew up in Connecticut that were Jewish. I dislike the whole thing. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth. But I've covered some of the negatives on Israel in past videos. My videos about the big event in 2001 that have long since been scraped away, scrapped by YouTube, but I was very happy with those videos and how they came out. And I talked about even to do with JFK's assassination and that this one, country had something to do with it. I believe that they were in part, partially responsible for, at least in terms of the research that I did, that there was evidence showing that there was CIA involved, Cubans who were involved in this, who were working on the Bay of Pigs, but also this group, this group of this religion, these people were contributed in one way or another, that they were part of it. I'm not going to talk about that here. I'm just going to say I covered that in past videos. I don't remember it all. It's so long ago, and it's not something I cover here. I don't talk about this Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's not a big thing for me. It's not my concern in what I cover here. It's not a subject I cover anymore. I covered it at one point and, moved away from it and haven't returned, so I forgot most of, what I knew. Like, I knew some things. I still know a little bit about it, but not much. Also, I had friends on Facebook. There was a woman who was constantly going to the Gaza Strip. She was an American woman. She wasn't Jewish or Palestinian, and she did work to help the Palestinian people. And she would report things. I think she sent me a few messages, a long time ago and was talking about her work or whatever, and maybe send me some links. I don't know. I have a vague memory of it. And then I had a number of various pages I subscribed to on Facebook, and some of those pages were Jewish people who were for peaceful, the peaceful treatment of, the respectful treatment of Palestinians. Jewish Voices for Peace or something like that. I don't know what it was. But I had a couple of pages that were like that. They were either, they were pro-Palestinian, or they were Jewish people who were working for the better treatment from the Israeli government in terms of its treatment of Palestinians. And those pages have now either been deleted, or they're just not sharing or recommending what they post, because I haven't seen those pages in years. I don't go on Facebook very much, but Facebook is pushing more superficial stuff on me. And, they've started banning truther stuff a long time ago. So, that was all there. That was a part of my, things I would see every once in a while if I went on Facebook or something like that. But now it doesn't exist. So I don't see much of this. I don't, again, it's to me a very negative part of the truth community, the people that hate Jewish people. But I have my own opinion and feelings about, Israel as a country, and it's not a positive feelings. I don't have positive regard for Israel and their treatment of the Palestinians and the way that they've gone about things, and also any sort of interference they've had with the American government. And I'll cover this now that let's get into the Kennedy comments here. Okay, so this is day 2. This is Monday, August 7th. I was going to do a journey series thing this morning. Usually I'll start the day with that, and it'll get me going, get my voice warmed up, just, talking. And it's fresh, whatever the stuff that I'm meditating, things that come to me in meditation or whatever. But I'm going to bypass that because I'm really, I don't want to say excited, but there's a lot of energy in this video about Kennedy's take on Palestine. And so let me read one of the comments. I had a few comments that people left where they talked about the stuff to do with Palestine that made me think about looking this up. It says, RFK Jr. has revealed himself to be a rabid liar. No, he hasn't. That's not my interpretation of this thing. And I'll get into that in a bit. So remember that this person started off by saying, this is, we have a similar view of Kennedy's take on Palestine. Me and this commenter, right? But this person says he's a rabid liar because of what he said here. And my understanding or my assessment is completely different than that. Not only in respect to the plight of the Palestinians, but also on a wider context lying about Iranians and the Middle Eastern affairs in general, referring to Robert Kennedy Jr.'s interview with Jimmy Dore and Max Blumenthal's follow-up. And so part of this is a Jimmy Dore situation. And I don't know if Jimmy Dore is I didn't see the interview. I saw part of it. Like I showed you a clip in my last video with the Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore is somebody that people recommended that I advertise on. So some of you guys watch his show. People have sent me clips of his, and I didn't like watching them. So, but let's get into all that here, because I'll show you a little clip of their thing, their exchange. And so I said to my wife, there's this thing, but he said something about Palestine. And we had heard most of the interviews. My wife and I, we were traveling, so it was easier to listen to them. And, it killed some time while we were on our trip, and I enjoyed his stories about his family, and, they're good to listen to. But I had not heard anything but that one clip with Jimmy Dore. And I don't believe he had a Max Blumenthal interview, but I'll get into that in terms of, there's an article written by what looks like something that's related to Max Blumenthal's podcast. Let me switch apps and show you what I'm talking about here. Okay, so this is the gray zone. And this is an article August 3rd, which is my anniversary day of first starting the Sajmarg meditation. Some of you guys know that. It's a kind of big day for me. But I forgot about this year, which was odd. Okay, I'm in the editing process. This video is going to be like 3-4 hours long. So I'm going to say this briefly. Which was interesting was I was doing spiritual work, and I don't want to get into that here. I'll talk about it in my Journey series video on Kennedy, and it ended on August 3rd. And so this came to my attention shortly thereafter. So, in the spiritual work, you transmit and you read somebody's condition, and the information you need comes back to you. And so that's very interesting. And like I said, I'll talk about that more in my Journey series. My next Journey series video, I think it's going to be 115. I think I talked a little bit about it in the 114 one, which will be released to the general public. It's now on my membership portion of my channel. But this video goes on so long, I don't want to say anything more about that, but I'll cover that in my Journey series. But anyways, Max Blumenthal wrote this. My wife ended up finding this article and sending it to me because she was, we were wondering what the issues were. And here he is waving an Israeli flag. And Max Blumenthal, I guess, is, I would assume by his name, he's a Jewish person who is against, in some ways, the Israelis' treatment of Palestine. And there is Jewish people who are very adamant about this. Well, we should just search this. This publication is called The Gray Zone. And I looked at it, and here's how Ron DeSantis puts Israel first and assaults free speech of American citizens. Here he is with Beatty. I don't know if that's an actual picture. They're saying, so this is, according to Wikipedia, The Gray Zone is an American far-left news website and blog founded by, and edited by American journalist Max Blumenthal. The website, initially founded as the Gray Zone Project, was affiliated with Alternet before becoming independent in early 2018. I used to read a little bit from this Alternet. It was a far left, I guess, what would be considered a far left kind of truther thing. And, wasn't as truther as the Truth Movement, but there's a guy there, I don't know. But they have their own thing, their own shtick. So it says here, Max Blumenthal is a writer for the Daily Beast, Ana Akbar, Media Matters, Al Jazeera English, the New York Times, Los Angeles Times. His dad was an aide to President Bill Clinton, so he's involved with the Clintons. His dad, Sidney Blumenthal, American journalist. I kind of remember him, but he got into the Israel-Palestine. He went there a couple of times and wrote a book about it. He was harsh on Israel, and he wrote this book called Goliath, which I guess is a reference to David and Goliath. And in 2013, Rabbi Marvin Hare, founder of Simon Weissen Center, said the center ranked Blumenthal in 9th place in their top 10 of 2013 anti-Semitic and anti-Israel slurs. They have a top 10. He's got a top 10. And Blumenthal was number 9. He wasn't, he wasn't 1, but he was still on the list. He made the list. So it says here that his father was Jewish and mother was Catholic. This is his dad, so Sidney Blumenthal, which makes sense, right? So he is, Max Blumenthal has some Jewish ancestry. So this is the Gray Zone, and this is what Max Blumenthal wrote about Kennedy, and it's a very, it's a hit piece type of a situation. This is a far left blogger, somebody who's, he's got his own far left agenda. This is like I guess what we consider a QB type of a person, like a far right wing person, but for the Democrats. And he has his own connections, right? This is somebody, I've heard the Blumenthal name before. This is somebody who's semi-famous. A day after Robert Kennedy Jr. agreed to a public discussion with Max Blumenthal on Israel-Palestine, his campaign walked back his words RFK Jr. has pledged unconditional support to Israel while spouting vitriolic anti-Palestine rhetoric. So I'll show you the Jimmy Dore clip in a minute, but Jimmy Dore suggests that he talked to Max Blumenthal, and I guess Max Blumenthal was going to interview Kennedy, and then Kennedy's campaign withdrew, and this is what they said. Kennedy's not debating Max Blumenthal. He's not going to debate anybody. He's running for president. You're not hearing me, she emphasized. We're not going to do it, okay? This is a phone call at the gray zone when they called him. Hours after a call with Cosgrove's Spear, I guess this is his aide, Stephanie Spear, interesting name, contacted Blumenthal directly to explain Kennedy would not agree to any public discussion with the gray zone editor until spring 2024, once the first 5 primaries are over. She offered Blumenthal an off-the-record phone conversation with a candidate as an apparent consolation, though Blumenthal never insisted on a formal debate, but rather a live interview, such as the one Kennedy has granted media figures like Dore, Glenn Greenwald, and Brianna Joyce Gray. Spear repeatedly stated that the candidate would not debate anybody except the President of the United States until the first 5 presidential primaries are over. We're hitting different demographics, and we're also hitting on different issues. So, it's really a strategy thing. We want to debate President Biden. He's a Democratic candidate. That's what we're waiting for. This June, however, Kennedy enthusiastically accepted podcaster Joe Rogan's offer to participate in a live debate with Peter Hotez, a pediatrician, one of the country's most vociferous boosters of the COVID-19 restrictions and mandates. Rogan pledged to donate $100,000, this whole thing, right? But now RFK is refusing to engage on an issue that he recently placed at the heart of his campaign, which has shocked many supporters who believe he offered an alternative to the pro-war bipartisan consensus, his unconditional support for the state of Israel and its military conduct in the occupied Palestine territories. During his conversation with Kennedy's communications director, Cosgrove challenged Spear on the candidate's sudden timidity. RFK goes on all these interviews and said he wants to debate people. So I'm a bit confused on why he says that, and you guys don't want him to debate. Is it your decision, or is him saying that? It's the campaign decision, Liam. That she said it. It's the campaign decision, Liam, Spear stated. He did not ask for a debate with Max, she continued in an annoying tone. So maybe we listen to that. We're not going to debate. I don't know how many times I have to tell you that. So here's the clip from Jimmy Dore and Robert Kennedy.
I love Max Blumenthal, but I do not think he's objective on Israel. I think his reporting on Israel is not it needs to be questioned.
Okay, well, here's what I would ask. Just like Peter Hotez ducked you and Joe Rogan, I would love, because Max is the guy to talk to about this, not me. So would you do an interview with Max, because he would be able to talk to you about this way better than I can. I'm really not good at this.
Yeah, I would love to talk to Max. I love Max Blumenthal.
Okay, so now I don't want to. When I was thinking about this yesterday, I'd watched this clip 2 days ago, and I thought about it, and I thought this was more Jimmy Dore's fault. Now I'm not so sure, because it's he's. I don't know how this came up in their interview, how Israel and Palestine, all these things came up, and RFK Jr. has taken heat from the anti-Semitic police, right? And it's affecting him or his campaign or both. Like, he's concerned about it, and so if Jimmy Dore is trying to help RFK Jr., like everyone in the truth community, is trying to, I want to switch over and go to my other, voiceover app, because I want to, let me do that here. So, there's a reason why presidential candidates lie, and it's because it's built into the system and it's expected. there are many things you can't tell the truth on and get elected president or any national political post. There are certain things you can't say, and one of them is criticizing Israel or the Jewish community. It's just something you can't do. And so, the truth community sucks in lots of different ways. We're not a community because we're not organized. It's a lot of individuals, and most of the people who are truthers are not fun to be around, right? They're not, people who come to the truth community, and I'm talking more about people like me, right? They're difficult personalities, and I'm not, this includes me, right? Difficult personalities, the kind of personalities that are not joiners and maybe critics, and who it just happens to be that we're right now. But if things were going well, we would be a negative, right? We would be the type of persons that question everything and question authority and things like this that are great, like right now. Like I am a valuable person now in the world because of what's going on right now with the system. But any other time I would be a nuisance, right? Like, it's the personalities that are you get what I'm saying, I think, or whatever. It's like I can't say any more than that. But right now, because the system sucks in ways that it's imploding, and the lies and deception is so bad, people like me, personalities like me, and many of you are actually right, and we have something to contribute in terms of talking truth to power and talking truth to whatever. But it's people looking for the negative truth, or some people are worse than others. They're just negative, and they are just unpleasant to be around. I see it in the comments. I'm like, I bet nobody loves you. Like, like I see comments all the time. Sometimes I say it, but I can just see the person's attitude, and I'm like, the woman who plays Captain Marvel, and I just talked about that in my other video yesterday a little bit. I covered the Secret Invasion. But whatever that actress's name, and I know her name, I just can't think of it right now, but whatever, don't care, don't tell me, don't need to know. She's a hyper feminist, and I saw something where she was talking about how, like, it's easier not to speak up and say something when her feminist beliefs are affected, but she's learned to speak up. And as far as I can tell, nobody likes her, right? And so there are people like that, and who are, they have to call everybody on everything. They have to speak up about everything, and they're just vigilant about those things, and they're confrontational, right? And so people are just always confrontational, and that has value now, but just for a short time, and it's not really a good personality trait. And in the truth community, there's these litmus tests that are given all the time by these holier than thou people in the truth community. And, you have to, if somebody's a legitimate presidential candidate and somebody who is coming in with a completely different approach, where Kennedy's just giving his honest opinion on things and going through the podcast world and giving his honest opinion on things, you have to help him out. And I don't know if Jimmy Dore was doing that here, was aware of that, but getting him to talk about Israel and Palestine wasn't helping him out. And it's become central to his campaign because they're trying to smear him with an anti-Semitic label, which his campaign is obviously concerned about. And, his position is not, sucks. His RFK's position sucks. And I can see why truthers are going to say he's now a shill or bail on him. And, I don't know what to say about it. I'm going to go through the interview he did with a rabbi, and it's atrocious. It's really bad. But he was put in this position because, as an interviewer, like if I was going to interview Kennedy, and I'm not an interviewer, but if I was going to do it, I would say, the things that I get to talk about here, because I don't care if you leave or not. I'm not trying to win popularity or vote. I have a 10% retention rate, right? For every 10 people that come here, one of them stays. And it might be worse than that, but at best it's a 10%. It's probably worse than that, right? It might be 1 out of 100. People who come and see my videos end up staying, right? So that's, and I don't care about it. Like, I'm like, yeah, you want to leave, here's the door. Like, part of me wants you to leave, right? So, I get to say things and do things. And, of course, I'm limited by YouTube and their, whatever's going on with them. But, I get to speak the truth. And, I know that people are going to get upset. This Tim Ballard just did an interview with Trump. And I'm like, oh, I can't wait to cover that. That's probably, I'm not going to get to do that today. But, okay, that's going to be interesting. And I know, all the people, the QB adjacent people, the Trump people, I say things that are truthful that bum them out. And, I can do that because I'm not running for political office. But you have to have a big tent, and Kennedy's trying to bring people in. And so I feel like they should have helped him out because he's already under attack for being an anti-Semite for bogus claims, which I've covered in the last couple of videos. And, if he's going to do good, let's say he just did one thing, which he prevented mandates for the next, as Bill Gates says, another one, right? Which I go, I have that meme. I'm not going to play here, but you guys seen it. There's going to be another one, right? And if there's going to be mandates where they force it on you, and let's say Kennedy just stopped that one thing, that would be good enough. Like, in terms of, what the issues are right now, that there would be a mandate in the future. And for many of us, that would be substantial. That's our, big issue, that we don't want to be forced to, get the what. And so, and there might be other benefits to him being president. We haven't seen him be president yet. And so, he's still the best candidate, despite what he's going to say here, and it's atrocious. And people in the truth community just are so rigid because it's like everybody I'm going to talk about here has victim consciousness and holds other people to higher standards than themselves. And that's the issue, right? Like, that's what's wrong with humanity, that we have become a manipulative, people using victim consciousness to manipulate people. I'm talking about Israel here as we go through it and some of these other, but it's people in the truth community, it's everybody. And we expect other people to be better than ourselves. And, there's that, story the third master of the Sage-Mark system has so often told, right? And I've told it here a number of times, more in the Journey series, but I'll repeat it here. There's a thing called the Guru Dakshina in the ancient spiritual traditions of India, where you have to give your guru or master some sort of a gift. It's usually not a material gift, it's something, right? And it comes up in weird ways in the Mahabharata and other places. But you're going to receive information from somebody. You're going to be trained. They're going to give you their life's work, right? Like your Guru Dakshina here, to those of you who think of me as a teacher or something, is I'm going to say something that's going to hurt your feelings. Like that would be like one thing, right? Like you got to accept that, my abrasive personality or my, bluntness or whatever, and is going to chase you away. Like, so you would have to, your self-esteem or your beliefs would be your Guru Dakshina, that you just learn to shut your mouth and not, be ungrateful for what you're getting because I said something you disagree with, right? That would be like, not that I'm thinking of myself as a guru or, I don't, a teacher or something, but some of you guys think of me that way. And that would be your Guru Dakshina, that you would have to tolerate my personality, right? like there's things like that, right? But in, this story, there's a disciple, a prospective disciple who goes to a guru and says, I want to be your disciple. And the guru says, you got to give me a Guru Dakshina. So the guy said, all right, sure, what is it? He goes, bring me the worst thing in the world. And so the guy goes out, and the kid goes out, and he finds one thing worse than another, right? He keeps on finding things that are worse. He's like, well, this is bad, but this is worse. And then finally he goes to defecate, and he says, this is the worst thing. So he looks at his poop and says, this is the worst thing. And he goes to grab the poop and bring it to his guru, And the poop, which can talk in this fable, says, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Well, my guru wants the worst thing in the world, and you're it." And the poop says, "What do you mean? I was birthday cake till I met you. I was an apple. I was, whatever, pizza, whatever it is, right? I was wonderful. I was something great, and you turned me into this, right? So why are you saying that I'm the worst thing?" And so the kid goes back to the guru and says, I found the worst thing in the world, and it's me. And the guru says, "Sure, I'll accept you as my disciple." And, this is something I'm very aware of because I torch people here. I, mock people, and I talk about how bad they suck. But I'm not comparing myself to them in this sense because, spirituality doesn't grade on a curve. And we're all given gifts. We're all given, a placement. We all are wherever we are spiritually. And when you become a spiritual person, you immediately elevate yourself, not in an egotistical way, but holding yourself to a standard that is far greater than all the people who aren't spiritual. When you become somebody who has a relationship with God, then more is expected of you immediately. As soon as you say, "God, I want to serve you. God, I want to pursue a life of my soul. I want to find out why I'm here. I want to, work for you. I want to, evolve spiritually. I want to get closer to you," all these things. As soon as you take that approach, that you're going to be a person seeking God, immediately your standard of your behavior is you have to reach a level that's far beyond the average person. Certainly beyond all the politicians and all the negative people and things like this, right? And so although I mock them and, whatever, here, these people I cover, Hollywood people, whatever, like I understand that I have to, you don't grade on a curve. Like I don't look at those people and go, "Oh, I'm so much better than them," because, they're not even on the spiritual path, right? They're not even, they don't even count yet, right? They haven't, they're still wandering around lost, looking for fame and glory and all these other things. I have no interest in politics. Like there's people who said I should, me for president, and I would make a horrible president. I would never be president. No one would elect me, and I wouldn't run, right? So, but it's a lower thing, right? Working on the material world is a lower thing. And, those of us who have had past lives, I believe I was a king in a past life and not a good one, right? And that's why I have a lot of insight to all these scams and things that they run, because I had a bad life as one of these Assyric kings in the past, which I've talked about in my journey series, right? And so, it's a learning curve that, first you come in and you suffer miserably, maybe in your first life. You're poor and you're ignorant and you just don't get it as a journey of your soul. And in that life, you see rich people, great people, famous people, and you think, "Oh, wow, they're so much better than me." And there's so many first time, incarnating as a human being souls on planet Earth. There's more people alive than are collectively dead. So the majority of people here are first timers. They don't have the ability for abstract thought. Maybe they've come up from the animal kingdom and the transmigration of the soul. And so this is their first time as a human being. Maybe some of you, right? And so that's, and I make fun of these people, but, they're first timers. They, that's their first experience with being a human, or maybe second, they're pretty new to this. And one of the stages everybody goes through is they think being rich and famous and being, having a powerful position, either in politics or somewhere or whatever it is, the goal of human life. Like everybody does that. And that's why I mock that all the time here, because we know that's not true. The people who get fame and wealth and power and politicians and, leaders and, and famous Hollywood stars, all these people, singers, they end up being miserable. And they figure out that that's not why they're here. And it may take them several lives. And most people can't even believe in a future life, a past life. They can't even conceive of a soul. They really can't see, there's a limitation here. The idiocracy of being overpopulated when there are, lots of people that are, just not good at being a human being yet. I mean, I'm not, I know that I've had, multiple lives and whatever it is. Like I've been around for a while, and I'm not good at being a human being yet. So you think about all the newbies, the people who, that's why I call them the QBs, right? They're people who are just, beginning to figure out what it is to be elevated to a higher level of consciousness. And it can take, thousands upon thousands of years, right? There's another great story that Master Charge used to tell. There is these two souls that are Krishna and Arjuna. Arjuna was the big warrior for the Pandavas in the Mahabharata. And they, in the etheric world, Krishna is Vishnu. There's these three gods, or a better way to look at it, because God has a specific connotation, is cosmic functionaries. That's what I call them. They work for God, and they are spiritual, and they have a play in all realms of activity, on the material world and then on the etheric world. And that is these three cosmic functionaries. One that's in charge of creation, Brahma. They're called Brahma by the Hindus, but it would be some other name somewhere else. Like these are intergalactic, beings, and they don't always it's not always the same soul. But there is, like, in a different planet, there is a soul that is in charge of creation all across the universe. And right now it's called Brahma in the Hindu tradition, but it's whatever it is, right? That's just their name for it. And there's Vishnu, who's in charge of preservation, right? There's a soul in charge of death, when people think of the Grim Reaper. There's a soul in charge of everything. There's a soul in charge of the sun. There's a soul in charge of the weather. And those souls eventually evolve out of that position and is given to some other soul that look after the material things that are going on in the universe. So there's Vishnu's in charge of preservation, and there is Shiva that's in charge of destruction. And there's always creation, preservation, and destructions, right? Destruction in everything. You're born, you're created, and then you have multiple creative experiences throughout your life. You have the beginnings of things. And then you have preservation, where you keep yourself healthy, you continue on with your life, and then eventually there's destruction and your death. But there's also destruction in your life, as an element. Things end and new things begin, right? And so these cosmic functionaries, there's one called Vishnu in the Hindu tradition, but it is, it is a being beyond a religion. It is a being that's in Christianity and in Islam and in atheism. There's always, it's everywhere, right? It's a part of our existence here. And Vishnu has a twin soul. He has the Vishnu soul. It's called Nara, that represents the ego, and Narayana, who is Vishnu's soul, right? And they always incarnate together, and they travel around together, and they have all these stories where Narayana is teaching Nara, the soul is teaching the ego, what's up, right? So there's a story where Nara and Narayana go and see this emperor, and the emperor's praying for victory, and he's praying, saying, give me this victory, give me more lands, give me more, right? And Narayana grants him his wish, and he answers his prayers, right? And then they go out, and there's a saint that's living out in the rural area, and the saint only has a cow. Like, the saint is basically poor, and he milks the cow, and that's how he feeds himself. He's an impoverished person, and the cow gets sick. And the saint starts praying for the soul of the cow, and Narayana kills the cow. And so Nara goes, WTF, what are you doing? There's this evil emperor, and he's praying for, to victory and more abuse and power, and you give it to him. And then here's a saint who's, nothing but a good person, and all he has is a cow, and you kill the cow. Like, that's totally effed up. And Narayana said, that emperor is in his, one of his early lives, and he's not going to come to God anytime soon. He's got to learn that power and wealth and, political power and money and, all these things aren't the goal. He needs to be given those things so he can finally find God in some future life. So he realizes this isn't, the reason he's here, which souls have to go through. Souls are going to have a life where you're going to have power and wealth, and then you realize, oh, this sucks. Like, I guess this isn't why I'm here. And, it might take multiple of those lives. He goes with the saint, he's almost fully dependent on God. Like, he relies on God for pretty much everything, but he also relies on the cow. Like, he looks at the cow as being, of course, the cow is sacred, but he looks at the cow as being something he needs. And the cow is the only thing keeping him from being 100% reliant on God and being liberated. And so killing the cow was a, blessing for him. And Master Charji had given this teaching, which I always thought was brilliant. He said the lowest part of the higher, which would be the spiritual life, being a spiritual person, is still higher than the highest part of the lower. And so there's a lot of low stuff, right, in terms of material life, but there's the higher part. It's they're being wealthy, it's being powerful, it's being, materialistically, better off than other people. But even the most powerful or most educated or most, smartest or whatever it is, right, the higher level of the material life is still lower than the lowest level of being a spiritual person. People who are focused completely on materiality, or mostly on materiality, are all lower than even the entry-level spiritual person who's just dipping their toe in the spiritual life and the spiritual pursuit. And this is something everyone should understand, that we think of these people as great people and great personalities, whatever they are, but they're still operating on the lower field of activity. And that goes certainly for politicians and people who are going to enter that realm. And there's rules of deception in the political world. And Kennedy is influenced by those rules of deception, right? He is, bound to these things because he wants to get elected. And he wants to do these things in the material world. And, I don't believe that the system should be saved. I don't believe any of these things. But there's a movement here that's, it's a little bit Kennedy's movement into being more truthful and not, not playing the role of just, doing polls and telling people what they want to hear is a step higher in the political realm. I don't want to say it's spiritual yet, but it's, it's a higher level of running for president. He's a higher level candidate. And so up until this point, it's been really refreshing. But then there was this, problem here with Max Blumenthal and, them putting him on the spot because, to do good things, you have to eat a lot of poop, right? You just have to. And, them calling him to task on these things and then him, having to go and dive into the Palestine thing in a way that's atrocious, because I'm going to show you the video clip there. So let's go back to my other app here. So I just briefly want to add this. I often play my older videos, especially if they're relevant, to, whatever I'm talking about, right? So this is my last video I made, supporting RFK and contrasting him to Alex Jones and how Alex Jones did damage to the truth community. And, I, above all, like not above all, but I feel like I'm a fair person. Like I'll evaluate people on a case-by-case basis, and, I accept that people change, people evolve, and people make mistakes. And I'm certainly not perfect myself, so I'm not holding people to a standard that I don't, far from perfect. Like I don't even try to be perfect, right? I put a little effort into character development, but not, what I probably should. And so, it's a boop showdown here. And, Kennedy's done a good job up until this point, but this was kind of like an Alex Jones moment. I felt like Alex Jones sort of jumped the shark. I felt like what Kennedy does, and you'll see in this interview, it's interesting, that this clip is playing here. I don't line these clips up. Whatever happens, happens. I just take my old, for the most part, sometimes I'll I'll pick a certain portion of one of my old videos for a specific voiceover. But even then, it's not, I don't put much effort into it. But seeing Alex Jones here reminded me of my last video and how I was comparing Alex Jones negatively to RFK Jr. And then I find out RFK Jr. just booped the bed, booped the bed in this, interview he did with this rabbi guy. So that's the Jimmy Dore clip there. And bombarded with anti-Semitism accusation, RFK enlists in Israel's propaganda army. That's what Max Blumenthal says here. You can read this article for yourself. And some of his points are valid and some of the things are. It's unfortunate that this happened, but I think it's a good thing, and I'll tell you why. And so then there is this interview, which is really bad. And I'm going to go to that now because RFK Jr. posted this clip. He does this interview with Rabbi Shumley. It starts off here. And so it's 18 minutes long. I'll probably go through the whole clip here. But I saw this interview, and it was on YouTube. It had like 3,000 views. It had been up there a while. And I was going to watch it, but I just didn't have time. And, this is, I guess, I'm not sure when this happened in the framework of it. I think this happened before the interview. So this interview he posted this on July 27th. And so I'm not sure when the Jimmy Dore interview took place. I think it took place afterwards, but this is all part of it. So let's get into it here.
I don't think I have ever heard a major American political figure express so kaleidoscopically support for Israel in the historical context as what we just heard. That was unprecedented. Yeah, to be honest, I don't even have words. That a man who just said that could be called an anti-Semite. Honestly, I just don't have words.
This is Kennedy's campaign who puts this guy's words up about, like, they're really concerned about Kennedy being called anti-Semitic. Like, it's a big thing for Kennedy, and it's a big thing for, his campaign or whatever it is, right? And that's why, he said all these things. And this guy gives him, these incredible praise for, a rabbi and a pro-Israel person. But he's torpedoed himself in the truth community, right? I mean, there's things that he says here that the majority of truthers, and again, I'm not talking about people who hate Jews, because you're never going to please those people. Those people are, and there's a lot of them in the truth community. I don't know what percentage. You're never going to please those people. You're never going to be able to take a position that you can get elected and please those people. So that's not what I'm talking about. But the average truther who doesn't hate Jewish people, but is concerned of the occupation and the, Israel's role and the, the constant claims of anti-Semitism and these things, right? And realizing that you can't criticize those things and they should be fairly criticized. You should be able to criticize those things, but you can't, you'll be censored on YouTube. You'll be censored in one way or another, attacked. Nobody's above criticism. No organization, no person, no religion. No, everything has, you have to be able to ask questions and be able to, not make false accusations, but raise legitimate questions. Especially when there's power and abuse of power and things like this. But you're not allowed to question that. And so there's people in the truth community who are going to be appalled by what RFK Jr. said. He looks kind of bummed here. And so RFK just chose the Israeli, the people accusing him of anti-Semitism and the lobby and these people over the truth community. Like, that's what's happened. And it's, hard for us to accept that because he'd been good on truther issues and, all these things. So let's get into it here.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't even have words. That a man who just said that could be called an anti-Semite. Honestly, I just don't have words. I mean, you're challenging an entire party right now to almost go back to the roots. So let's talk about that for a moment. What is your connection to Israel? What do you think about Israel? And what do you think about the Democratic Party's posture vis-a-vis Israel?
Grew up believing that the state of Israel was this extraordinary, blossom in the desert. It was an oasis of democracy, of values, of human rights in a midst of sea of totalitarianism. And I made that assumption. I mean, I assumed that my children would feel the same way. I was shocked in recent years that my kids coming home from college had a very different narrative about Israel that they had picked up from their, from the Gestalt, from the milieu. And that narrative is the narrative that has been adopted in recent years by the Democratic Party, which sees Israel as an occupying nation, an imperium, oppressing indigenous Palestinians.
I can understand Kennedy having a different view on things, but I don't know how he comes to this conclusion, right? I'll let him continue here.
And as you know, as a racist state and an apartheid state. And, part of my campaign is going to be a major piece of it is going to be explaining to American citizens why that view is wrong and making the moral case for Israel. Israel, as you know, is the only place in the Mideast where there's freedom of expression for all citizens. 1.9 million Palestinians in Israel, and they vote. Palestinians serve in the legislature. They serve in the courts. They serve, I believe there's 3 Palestinians on the 12-person Supreme Court. There's no place in the Mideast where there is a Jew on any court or any legislature. Maybe in Morocco, there may be some public officials who are Jewish, but nowhere in the Mideast.
I can see why he didn't want to debate Max Blumenthal, right? Because his view is so bad here, and it gets worse from here.
It's the only place where women have rights. It's the only place where gays have rights. There was 2 weeks ago a gay pride parade in Israel with 150,000 people in both Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. At the same time, the government of Iran is hanging gays from cherry pickers and castrating them. And that is true throughout the Mideast. It's the only place where there's freedom of religion, where you are free to practice any religion that you want in Israel. It's the only place where you can have freedom of expression. A Palestinian who wants to criticize his government had better do it in Israel. It's the only place where he can do it. If he does that in the West Bank, he will be tortured and killed and arrested, or in Gaza. The Israeli Supreme Court, and I've been a critic of the current reforms or the modifications of the Supreme Court.
So there's a point I'm going to make later, because we know who you get to criticize here in America, and he should know better than anybody, right? Because the reason he's doing this, because he's under attack of saying anti-Semitic things, right? He's saying how you can criticize Israel in Israel, but you can't criticize Israel in America. And I want to come back to this because I want to wait till he hammers Palestine. It's a timing thing. Like, I have my I have my takes, right? But he knows as well as everybody else. You can't criticize Israel in America. You can, but the backlash and the powers that be, like he's having to come on and do this because he was wrongfully accused of anti-Semitism. And because of that, he's doing this here. And it seems to be something he believes from a very young age. Like he said, it was some sort of beacon, right? This brilliant beacon of democracy in the Middle East. But like we know, right? And maybe you don't. Like my wife didn't know. She hadn't known a lot of these things that I had covered years and years ago personally, but I don't cover them now, which I'll talk about in a bit. Let him go back to this thing here.
In Israel, I can criticize Israel without being an anti-Semite. I want to talk about that in a minute. But Israel's Supreme Court judiciary is the most humane judiciary in the world. As somebody who's a litigator and a constitutional scholar and who taught law for 35 years, there is no country in the world with a court like a judiciary like Israel. This is the only country that have actually dealt with the ticking time bomb issue. So the ticking time bomb issue scenario is if there's a terrorist who knows the location of a bomb that is about to kill civilians in huge numbers, can you torture that person to find out where the bomb is located? In Israel, the law is clear. You cannot. You cannot. And that is evidence of the humanity that you see in all of Israel's policies, military policies, the hold that the court has over Israel. I'm very proud of the Israeli Supreme Court. I don't want to see it dismantled. I think it is a source of pride to the world about what an independent judiciary can do. They won't allow people to, it won't allow the military to capture people's relatives in order to pressure somebody to talk.
There's laws, right? There's the laws, and then there's, Kennedy knows because there's a law against murder, but he's saying the CIA murdered his father and his uncle. Two high-profile, one was president, one was going to be a future president, and we know about the Kennedys, but he said the CIA murdered them, right, and attacked his family. Now, that's against the law. What they did was against the law. Murdering a president, certainly. It's, borderline treasonous, which is one of the worst. Treason is one of the few things that's punishable by death. And so he's saying the CIA did these things. Of course, the Mossad is as bad as or worse than the CIA, probably worse. And so he's talking about these things like, these are the official position, right? And Kennedy goes after the official position in almost everything else he talks about, like going after the CIA, going after going after Fauci or whatever. People say things, right? Oh yeah, this is what we believe. These are our laws. These are our values. But do they live up to those values? And, I used to cover this a little bit, and I got out of it, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And so some of these things I don't know directly about, but we know that Israel isn't what he's talking about here. Like what he's saying about Israel is either propaganda or fantasy, right?
The conduct of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, when they go into Palestinian territories is beyond anything in the world. Colonel Camp, one of the leading military historians and tacticians around the world, said, last week, 2 weeks ago, when Israel went to Jenin, Jenin is a bomb factory. Most nations, Russia, when it was dealing with issues like Jenin and Chechnya, simply bombed the neighborhood because you have a neighborhood where virtually 100% of the people who live there are supporting terrorism, where the terrorists are hiding behind civilians, and where everybody is involved in bomb making.
So him embracing the terrorism narrative. This thing is called guerrilla warfare. And Kennedy's a big, patriotic historian. And, the British would have called, this is how they were viewed, would have called the Boston Tea Party and the things being done by the revolutionary Americans against their occupation terrorist, right? The British would call Gandhi a terrorist. This is how, when there is an occupying force that is abusing people and Palestine doesn't have an army, right? Let's go to that. I have a few things to show you here. Okay, so I looked on Facebook to see these groups. I had followed a few of these groups. And, this isn't a big issue for me, as many of you know. I don't talk about this ever. You probably don't know the last time I've talked about Palestine and Israel and all these things. It's not something I talk about. And I don't really care about it. There's reasons I don't talk about it is because there's so many people that hate Jews and blame everything on Jews in the truth community. And then there's just the controversy behind it and YouTube's restrictions. And I covered it in my big event of 2001 videos. Some of you guys remember I covered it in the third video. And I did some research into it, and I, forgot a lot about it. But on Facebook, I followed a few groups. A couple of them were Jewish people in Israel, Israelis, who are liberal and are appalled by the way Palestine is being treated. And they used to post videos, and I watched some of them. I didn't watch most of them because I don't go on Facebook and, I don't really care about this issue, but occasionally I would click on one, and it would show Israeli soldiers or Israeli people beating up and bullying Palestinians. It also showed foreign, there's people like Peace Corps type people that went into Israel and went into the Gaza Strip, and they would be there to support the Palestinian peoples being bullied because they don't have an army, right? And, him saying that it's a beacon of truth here, the country, and the Palestinians have rights. If you see these videos, and there's lots of them, they're beating the crap out of these people. And I couldn't even show you them here on YouTube. This video would certainly be demonetized, and maybe it would be banned altogether. There was a video I sent to my wife that I found, and I was just doing a little research. I didn't have time to find all these old videos I'd seen, and I don't know where they are or where they exist even now. But I've seen lots of them, and many of you have seen them as well. But there was a little boy, he's 8 years old, and the Israeli army took him very forcefully. He's crying. The Palestinian people are trying to pull the kid back, and they took him away to interrogate him to figure out who was throwing rocks, because that's what the Palestinians do. They throw rocks because they don't have a military. And this is a website called Jewish Voice for Peace. I believe this is one of the groups that I followed on Facebook. And these are Jewish people who post things about the abuse that happens to Palestinian people, an occupied force. And so historically, and again, I'm just sort of doing a review of this, but here's a comparison of the military strength of Israel versus the Palestinians. So the Israelis have an air force of 34,000 people, and they have 875 combat aircraft and 84 transport aircraft and 286 helicopters. And everybody knows that modern warfare is conducted with who controls the skies. If you can control the skies, and we saw this in Libya, we saw this in Iraq and these other places, that you can't fight a military battle unless you have air superiority, or at least the ability to create havoc from above. And, that's how modern military works. If you don't have an air force, no air force for Palestinians, no planes, no air force, no anything. And so they're screwed. They can't fight a war against Israel because they have no air force. And this is here, Navy, and this is what the Israelis have, 15 combat vessels, 50 patrol crafts, 3 landing crafts, and this is the amount of personnel, over 20,000 people. Everybody in Israel has to serve in the army. It's mandatory that you become a part of the IDF, which is, like them saying that they're a defensive, the IDF is Israel Defense, whatever it is, fund, whatever. Israel Defense something, right? They're not in a defensive position because they're fighting against a country that has no air force and no navy. Tanks, Israel has almost 4,000 tanks. Palestinians have 0. Armored vehicles, they have 6,000, and the Palestinians have 50. Israeli artillery, and again, I feel like this is a pretty accurate assessment because this is what I know about, because they're throwing rocks, right? Like this could be a website that, is pro-Palestine, sure. But, when we see Palestinians fighting back, what are they doing? They're throwing rocks or they do some sort of, these bombings that Kennedy's calling them terrorists, right? But that's not accurate. They're an occupied country that has no power. And, terrorism, so-called being, guerrilla warfare, is the only way they can fight back. And they don't really do that all that well either. And so this is the artillery. You can see there's a huge advantage where the Palestinians have next to nothing in terms of artillery. So this is, they have no chance, right? And so the Palestinians have about 62,000 personnel, around 20,000 in Gaza. And the Israelis have 500,000 total personnel of troops and ground forces. And so they have, it's just not even a contest, right? This is like a professional football team playing, kindergartners. There's no, this is not, it's not fair. So then there's when Israel came into existence. The country of Israel is relatively new. It came into existence in 1948. And Kennedy's going to talk about how when this happened, there was more Jews than Palestinians. And he neglects to say what's covered here. And so after World War I, we'll cover this here as a little bit of a write-up here. How did Israel become a country in the first place? European Jews arrived at Zionism partly because of the rising anti-Semitic persecution. People started to dislike Jews and wanted them out of their country. And England was control of Palestine after World War I. And this is, it says this in multiple places. Social and political developments in Europe convinced Jews they needed their own country. And their ancestral homeland seemed like the right place to establish it. European Jews, 90% of all Jews at that time, arrived at Zionism partly because of the rising anti-Semitic persecution and partly because of the Enlightenment introduced Jews to secular nationalism. And between 1896 and 1948, hundreds of thousands of Jews resettled from Europe to what was the British-controlled Palestine, including large numbers forced out of Europe during the Holocaust. Many Arabs saw the influx of Jews as a European colony movement, and the two peoples fought bitterly. The British controlled the violence. The British couldn't control the violence. In 1947, the United Nations voted to split the land into two, and almost all of the roughly 650,000 Jews went to the blue territory on the map, and the right, and the majority of Arab population, roughly twice the size of the Jewish community, went to the orange. And so you see here that the Israelis were given all of this nice coastal land, and they were given, the majority of the land, more than the Palestinians who were split up in these different sections, right? You see that they'd have to pass through Israeli territory to get, there's three different sections there, where the Israelis have a nice pathway to, all their land is connected, right? So this is already an issue. And the Palestinians, it was Palestine. This was their country, right? And the Israelis immigrated into this country. And I'll get into this as we go through this with Kennedy. I'm just showing you, this is what the stories say. The Jewish residents accepted the deal. The Palestinians, who saw the plan as an extension of a long-running Jewish attempt to push them out of the land, fought it. The Arab states of Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria all later declared war on Israel as well. And I don't agree with that assessment. We'll get into that in a bit. Israeli forces defeated the Palestinian militias and Arab armies in vicious conflict that turned 700,000 Palestinian civilians into refugees. And so that's the beginning of Israel, right? And you see this is what's happened since. So this was Palestine in 1946. All of this was Palestine. And then the UN plan in 1947 gave most of the good land and the continuous land to Israel. And then by 1967, Palestine was these two little, this disappeared up here. And now here, Palestine is a fractured, fragmented country. It used to be Palestine, and now it's Israel. And Israel has taken it over. And the way that Kennedy portrays this thing, you can just look at this map and see he's just off, completely wrong. He's wrong in his assessment. Like, this is, the map don't lie, right? The ball don't lie. And so this is just, look at this map and you know what's happened here. And to say that they're a beacon light of freedom and all these things and democracy and liberty and human rights is, we know is 100% wrong. And his assessment is just, it's hard for truthers to, he's just so wrong. And he's just so like slathering, bowing down to Israel in such a like pathetic way. It's hard to watch, right? It's going to get worse. But here's the population. This is 1878. So they had 400,000 Christians, 400,000 Muslims, and they were 85% of the country. They had 43,000 Christians who were 10%, and 3% were Jewish. And my understanding was that the Christians and Jewish people were treated kindly by the Muslims at that time. And I don't know that for sure. That's just my sense of what I've heard. That's one of the reasons that the Jewish people went to Palestine in the first place when they were fleeing Europe, because the Palestinian people were more friendly than some of the other countries they could have gone to, right? And this is in 1920, 1945, the Jewish people started to immigrate into Palestine. 5,000 people in 1920, 21, 10,000 people. So they started to get their numbers up. 1925, 33,000. So they started to come in droves. Jewish immigration to the historic Palestine grew over the first decade of the 20th century, especially during the 1930s. As Jewish population in Palestine increased, the indigenous Arab population put pressure on the British government to control the immigration. Thus, in the 1920s, the British restricted Jewish immigration by fixing quotas and authorizing certain Jewish organizations to distribute immigration certificates as they saw it. Nevertheless, with increased persecution of the Jews in Europe, many Jews were not willing to wait years for immigration certificates. Thus, in 1934, the Vallis became the first chartered immigration ship to arrive in Palestine, carrying 350,000 Jews. By the time WW2 had begun, tens of thousands of Jewish immigrants have arrived illegally in Palestine by ship. And these countries, many of them dumped their Jewish immigrants, some of these European countries and some of these things, in ways that was illegal according to the British government, but they allowed it anyway. And there was loopholes and ways of getting around it. And so the people of Palestine, think about if they opened the border to the southern border and you let all the immigrants that wanted to come through that border come to America. And they ended up being a third of the population. I mean, we already know about how Americans feel about the southern border. It's a big political issue. We know about this in Europe, where there's all these Muslim refugees pouring into France and these other countries, and they have these strict rules against it, and there's anti-Muslim sentiment, right? There's anti-immigrant sentiment here in America. And that's what happens when Native Americans, when the white people start to pour over and take over their lands. Nobody feels good about that, right? When you become displaced by immigrant people coming in. And so the Palestinians had every reason to feel a certain kind of way as their population grew here, right? So the Jewish population grew more and more here, and you can see it just keeps on growing. And this is, they had become, from starting off, the beginning here, this first graph, they started off with 15,000 Jewish people and Jewish-born, foreign-born, 10,000. So there's 25,000 Jewish people back in the 1800s. And then by the end of, here it is, 1945, there was 300,000 of Jewish people pouring into the country, right? And the Palestinians, many of them, Jewish people are living in their nice houses and things they used to have, right? This is what they they ended up having where they had to leave areas where they had, properties, and they got kicked out of their homes, and Jewish people started living in their homes. And so the Palestinian people who had no army and were prejudiced against by the British, who, there was the Judeo-Christian belief in the British, who were more in favor of the Jewish people, and also wanted to, they were getting rid of a problem here, and so they favored Israel over Palestine. The UN did, and the Israel and England did, and so this was rigged against the Palestinian people, who saw their land be taken away from them, and they couldn't do anything about it, right? And so Kennedy's assessment, just based on this, historic crime, or whatever you want to call it, right? Abuse of power and disenfranchisement of the people, and his position here is horrible. And so then it just kept on going in this direction. In 1944, there were the Muslim people. There was this many Muslim people. They made up 60%, and this many Jewish people, and they made up 30%. And also they brought in Jews from Ethiopia. This was another thing that happened. Black Jews who if you search, you can find videos and things about how the Israeli people and the government is prejudicial against Ethiopian Jews, and there's racism there. But they brought them in to get the numbers up. Okay, so I wanted to get that in there because that's a little bit of the history, and I had to review it myself. And there's lots of things I forgot about it, but there's an abuse of power here, and Israel has taken over what used to be Palestine, and it's not cool, right? And there's a religious connotation I'll get to in a bit, but this is going to come back up, all the stuff I just showed you, because of what this guy's about to say here.
And those bombs are destined to kill civilians, to be strapped on men, women, and children, and kill civilians in Israel. Most nations, and we've done this ourselves, and clearly Russia was doing it in Chechnya. Chechnya would go in there and bomb that neighborhood. What the Israeli IDF does is they send people to do retail combat, door to door, putting IDF soldiers at risk in order to avoid civilian casualties, collateral casualties. In the recent Jenin attack, there was 12 terrorists who were killed, all of them involved in bomb making, all of them involved in planning attacks on Jewish civilians, and not a single innocent person, child or civilian. Israel is unique in the Mideast for saying we're only going to attack military targets, and they're very, very disciplined about doing so.
So I've seen videos of Israeli soldiers just beating the crap out of Palestinian kids. Like there's videotape of this. There's groups that go in there to stop the bullying and abuse by the Israeli army and the Israeli people. And you can see the Palestinian people can't fight back. Like they'll be protesting and Jewish people come up and slap them and harass them. You can see protests of these people wanting, their civil liberties. And then there'll be a counter protest of Jewish people throwing rocks at the people and beating them up. You can see Ethiopian Jews protesting their rights, and there's Jewish people beating them up, and the cops are doing nothing about it. There's lots of video evidence that destroys what Kennedy's saying here, right? Again, I'm not an expert in this subject. I'm not, it's not something I cover here. But he's so far off base here. And it goes against everything that he represents in his campaign about being truthful. He's running a truthful campaign, which he's done an excellent job at up to this point in the way that he's presented information. But this is he's just like slathering all over the official story here. He's gone up against the official story, and, we might not always agree with what he says, but he does a reasonable job of presenting information. Like he's an expert. He's a great storyteller, and he's also a lawyer. He's a lawyer who knows how to argue things. He makes compelling arguments. like somebody who didn't know what he's talking about here. My wife didn't know that much about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, so I went and pulled up a bunch of websites and we talked about it. And I said, yeah, this is where he's off on all these things. Because she said to me, we watched a little of the video, and she says, if you watch the rest of it and he explains it, it makes, his position makes more sense. And I'm like, yeah. Then I watched it. I'm like, oh, it's much worse. I'm like, the more I watch, the worse it gets. And it just keeps on getting worse from here. So here are the statistics, right? There has been, since 2010, and, there's been a lot more in the beginning and the wars and the things that went on before this. But this is the last, basically 10 years to 2019. There was 3,601 Palestinians killed and 100,000 injured by Israeli forces, right? So this is, the number on the Palestinian side. And then for Israelis, 203 were killed and nearly 4,000, almost 5,000 were injured by the Palestinians. Because that's what happens when you have a military force against a country that doesn't have a military, right? So Kennedy's positions are ridiculous here. Like, they're embarrassing. Like, we know what would happen when an occupying force, this is the empire versus the rebels, right? And, the rebels have to fight with other types of means because they don't have an army. And, they're the underdogs. And this is the country that was stolen from them, taken away from them by the British, by the UN, by immigrants coming from other countries. And the Palestinians had their lands and their homes and their everything taken away from them. And now they're relegated to be like the Native Americans, right? Kennedy is a big Native American guy. He talks about this in the Math Hoffa interview where they're talking about reparations for African American people. And Kennedy says, well, what about the Native Americans? Because he says there is, they got paid $22 for Manhattan, that famous story that one of the Native American tribes sold Manhattan for $22. And everything else was taken from them. So all the land, this rich, valuable land that's worth trillions upon trillions of dollars, was once owned by the native peoples. And they were relegated, because they lost the war. He's going to talk about later on, he's going to say, losing the war fair and square, like to the Israels, right, to Israel. But, he's talked about the Native Americans, what would their reparations be, how they feel about reparations to black people because of the, what happened to them, right? And you can go through this across the world. Every group that's been wronged by another group and claim that there needs to be payback, every group that's been invaded, every group that's been enslaved, every group that's been, as well as individuals. And you could never, how far do you go back? It's a whole thing, right? I have a whole thing about it. And I'll talk more about it when I get into if I haven't talked about it already. I probably have. But if I haven't, about, the idea of victimization, because if everything comes from God, then there's no victims. But Kennedy is big on land being appropriated and taken from other countries and other peoples. And he's worked extensively with the Native Americans. He said like 20% of his work had to do with Native Americans. And so the Palestinians were the indigenous people. We see that from where they were in 1800 and where they became in terms of the demographic breakdown of their country right before they decided to separate this country like they did with Pakistan and India. And the Palestinians obviously got the wrong end of the stick. I'll talk about this more later on, because they don't get any coastal land. The land that they get is, they didn't get the preferable land, they didn't get the cities. They had to move out of their houses, lots of them, and things like this. So it wasn't, it was a raw deal for them from the beginning.
Palestine, the Palestinian Authority, in contrast, follows a long tradition of deliberately targeting civilians. So anybody, and not only that, but they have a pay-to-slay policy. That is the official policy of the Palestinian Authority. If you kill a Jew, not a member of the IDF. If you kill any Jew, you are going to get awarded with pay for life. And if you go to jail or you're killed, your family will get payments for life. The official policy of Hamas.
Okay, so as far as I know, and again, I don't know that much about this, but Hamas is a controlled opposition group, right? It's something that, false flag type of things that are done by Hamas that allows Israel to take more lands. Again, this is, I don't want to say, it's certainly not fact what I'm saying, but that's my understanding. All of this, right? There's two things here. So there are two things here. The map doesn't lie, right? You look at the map and it just, there it is. This was Palestine in 1946. This is what it looked like in 2012. And there's been more and more legal settlements built, and they're taking what little Palestinian land is left here, right? And then there's the numbers. Here's another graph here. See it here. These are the amount injured, and these are amount injured and killed. The blue is the killed. There's almost no blue here on the Israeli side. You can see the blue here, and the red of the injured. Like, this is a slaughter. This isn't, there's, Kennedy's position is so lame here. I just want to add one more thing. I'm editing here. I had a hard time finding the total statistics of the life of the new Israel, the Israel of 1948, and the death rate between Palestinians and Israelites. And I know it's going to be way more Palestinians. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That statistic I showed you is from the last 10 years, but most of the damage was done before that. And so we know that the Palestinians have taken a beating. They've lost their homes. I saw a video where people were living in wealthy homes and valuable cities and land at by the sea. And I talk about this more in some part of this video coming up. The valuable oceanfront area. And they had to go, they were homeless. And Jewish settlers, immigrants, some of them illegal, came in and moved into their houses. So you could understand why the Palestinians and the Arab Muslim people around these countries are pissed about what happened here. It's forced upon them. Whenever you use force, there's a backlash. And Kennedy's position here is just everything he stands against. That's the problem. Like, he's always on the side in terms of his interviews of the disenfranchised and the people who are don't have a voice, and whatever it is, environmental lawyer, and he represents underdogs, and clearly the Palestinians are the underdogs here. They don't have a voice. They don't have and what does he think? They're just being jerks, like they're outmanned, they're outgunned, they're throwing rocks at people. There's a Jewish comedian who once said, I don't know if he was Jewish, but he was a comedian, and he said a joke. I think you can find it somewhere, maybe on the internet. And he said, "Why aren't there more Palestinian baseball players?" Right? It's funny. It's kind of twisted, but it's a funny joke because they throw rocks because they don't have a military. And so Kennedy's position here is just, it's inexcusable. Let's get back to it.
Is the genocide of all the Jews. So they consider, and this, by the way, in 1940.
Okay, so be honest, bro. There's no chance of that. They have no army. Israel is the strongest force in the region, right? Israel has an unfair advantage in any conflict because they have a superior military force and they're backed by the Americans. Nobody's backed more by the Americans than Israel. And the neocons, who he claims to dislike, their number one ally, their number one, what they consider an asset or an ally or whatever it is Israel. The neocons love Israel, and he's talks about the neocons invading the the Biden administration, and their primary objective is to destroy Iran and all these other countries in the Middle East, and it led to the slaughter of Iraqis and these other peoples in these illegal wars, destruction of Afghanistan, the destruction of Libya and these other countries, destroying Muslim people. I mean, just the, we all know about it, right? And so, his position here is like atrocious, and just the fundamental dishonesty.
When Israel was attacked at its birth, the plans were captured of Syria and Egypt and the other nations, and their plan was complete extermination of the Jews. They took the side of Hitler during World War II. They lost the war, and the practice and the policy of all those nations is to kill individual civilians, whereas Israel does the opposite. It only attacks military targets. Now, in any attack, civilians do die, and that's always a tragedy and always an atrocity, but it's not deliberate. And
this is so bad. And so that original war, this is where it just gets greasy. He brings his dad into it here in a little bit. But there's something that, if you're interested in this subject, there's a video called The Day Israel Attacked America. It's on Al Jazeera. It's got 2.2 million views. I don't think it's an Al Jazeera original video. I saw this years ago. But I sent it to my wife to watch. And this is about the USS Liberty. And the USS Liberty was a information gathering vessel. It's not a militarily armed vessel. Like they don't have, it's not a war vessel, right? It's not a warship. And when the 6-Day War started, the USS Liberty was sent through the Mediterranean Sea, right? So here's Italy, Europe, Greece, right? And here's Israel. And they were in war here with these various countries here, Egypt and these other countries. They were supposedly attacked on both sides. And the USS Liberty was sent over, see the big satellite here, was sent over to gather information for the Johnson administration. RFK Jr. had just been, JFK had just been assassinated. And so this is 1967. And he had been assassinated, I think, in 1963 or 5 or whatever it was. And so they were bombed by Israel. The ship was. And they caught, the transmission, and they said to sink the ship. First, they were attacked by Israeli planes that Israel probably got from America to some extent, or support that they were getting from America. At least now that would be the case. And so they came back with a torpedo because they knew that whatever happened, they had to sink the ship. They knew the Americans should find out what Israel did to one of their war vessels. This was an act of war. Israel created an act of war, and they knew what they were doing. The American flag was flown, and these sailors were all bitter about it, right? I mean, they're all talking about it here.
Require immediate assistance.
The American Sixth Fleet was 500 miles away and picked up the signal. So did the Israeli armed forces. The attack stopped shortly afterwards.
And so there are casualties. And there's a story told. They interview a lot of the sailors who survived. And they're so bitter about this because they were mistreated afterwards, and they whitewashed the whole story. They wanted to not embarrass or have the American people know that Israel attacked America. That was their number one goal wasn't to support the troops, wasn't to support the Navy personnel, give them awards, give them whatever. They're very bitter about it. They're pretty pissed off about the way they were treated. And there's a story in there, and I could go find it. I just don't have the time. This is a long-ass video as it is. But there's a story that they tell where the Israelis send down a message, like a helicopter, after they've torpedoed the vessel. There's a big hole in the side of it. It's brutal. And, they were, this was an information ship, and they picked up the transmission that the Israelis were saying, we have to sink the ship, because they knew that they couldn't let these guys live and tell their story. So they were willfully trying to execute these basically unarmed sailors that were just going to the war to find out what was going on, and the Israelis didn't want them to do so. So they sent down a message saying, is there any casualties? And there's like legs and arms laying all over there's like, it's brutal, it's carnage, right? And the guy gives them the finger, the American soldier. I mean, they like hate Israel now. They hate what they did. And they hate that this was never addressed. And the American military never retaliated and never, this was an act. I'm editing. I just had to redo this audio part. But what I end up talking about here, and some of it got messed up, was, when Johnson realized it was Israel, and then I'll pick it up from there here. When they first heard the vessel was being under attack, and then we found out it was Israel, he pulled back all American planes and forces because he didn't want to mess with Israel. And I think that has a connection to JFK Sr.'s death. That's whatever it is, right? But whatever went on there, the Johnson administration found out that they had a mole because there was a negotiation afterwards, and the Israelis ended up giving America $6 million, one for every Jew that died in the Holocaust, which was a dickish move on their part, right? And, it's well worth watching because it's a very telling thing historically. And the reason I'm bringing this up here is because RFK Jr. is saying that the Israel was attacked in the Six-Day War. But what this vessel was going to find out was that Israel was the aggressor. Israel immediately seized lands and things like this, and they weren't the victim. Like there's a victim consciousness here, which we'll get into after we get through the RFK interview here.
They're unique in that sense, and I just want to go through a little bit of the history of Israel, because Israel, for many of you who don't know the history,
and including him, this would be for everyone who doesn't know the history, because what he's going to say is horse boop, right? It's just.
First of all, the Jews have been there for 3,700 years. The term Palestine was actually invented by the Romans when they were trying to exterminate the Jews and move them out. They named Judea after the Jews' enemies, the Philistines. But it was part of the Ottoman Empire. Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire. And the Palestinians during World War I fought against the Allied forces. So they were on the losing side. And at the end of the war, the Ottoman Empire was dismantled. And the League of Nations and Woodrow Wilson said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take apart the Ottoman Empire, and we're going to give the ownership of those countries to the indigenous people who lived in the country. Well, Palestine was a large area. It's called the British Mandate. And more than half the people who lived there were Jews. I think it was about 600,000. I think there were about 500,000 Palestinians. I could be wrong about those numbers.
He's totally wrong because I showed you. That's why I showed you that stuff before, right? That there was 25,000 Jews there, in the 1800s. So this is long before World War I. And it was only close to 1948 that the numbers got up to where there was 1/3 of the population was Jewish. Still, the majority of people there were Palestinians. And we saw that. The numbers don't lie, right? We know that the numbers are there. This is historical fact. And he's saying the numbers are probably disputed. No, they're definitely disputed. Because had there been more Jews there, the place would have been called Israel. It would have been called Israel, not Palestine. It would have been called its biblical name. If there had not been more Palestinians there, again, this is how, there's all this, this idea of, who owns land, right? Well, it's the occupying force. It's the force with the better military, right? Or there's an exodus, which is, there's an exodus in the Bible, and there's this. Let me see if I can find it here. So it's considered the promised land, right? Here's Fox News. The Bible says Israel belongs to the Jews and has for 3,000 years, and God didn't say that, right? I can say surely that God doesn't say that God doesn't say the land belongs to these various people. One of the problems with, I talk about the problems with Christianity and Hinduism and the various religions here, because religions have flaws. Religions are man-made. They're not made by God, and they have been warped by man. The original message, Jesus' original message, has been distorted by the religion. And I don't know what's happened with Judaism, but the Old Testament sucks, and that is the original Jewish Bible, right? Whatever that's called. It's called the Tanakh or something like that. And that's what the Old Testament is in the Christian Bible. Of course, that's been edited as well, but it's, similar. And I'll get into that in a bit, right? But in terms of the idea of chosen people, there's no chosen people. You choose. You choose to follow God's orders and God's will. God doesn't choose you. God chooses everybody. You have to choose God. That's the freedom of choice we have. God doesn't have a chosen son. He doesn't have a chosen people. He doesn't have an only son. Everybody's a child of God. It's up to us to do the choosing on our side. God chooses us. Do we choose God? And we all do it sometimes we choose God, sometimes we don't, right? Spiritual people, atheists, whatever it is. Sometimes people choose God. Sometimes people choose their higher nature. Sometimes people choose the path of their soul. But in terms of this, I'll get more into that in a bit. But the Bible says Israel belongs to the Jews and has for 3,000 years. More white evangelicals and American Jews say God gave Israel to the Jewish people. And so this is a Christian belief. And God, not Balfour, gave Israel to the Jews. This is the Jerusalem Post, Balfour. And so they believe that this is their land. And that's, in terms of the Palestinian Authority here. But it says here, so why does the book of Genesis exist? For one reason, to teach us that God created the world. The earth belongs to him. He gives it to whom he sees fit. And he gave a tiny sliver of land in the Middle East to the Jews as an internal inheritance, and it's called Israel. So this is from the Jerusalem Post. It talks about Trump here. U.S. President Donald Trump is the most pro-Israel president in history, and proved it again with his precedent-setting peace initiative. And so if you come from the perspective that God has ordained that this land is given to the Jews, then you have to believe that the Palestinians and the land of Palestine, which it was before 1948, is an abomination, and they're thwarting God's will. And there's so much punishment and revenge and punishment and horrible things in the Old Testament. The Canaanites need to be destroyed. Like all these Arab nations have to be destroyed. God orders the Jews to destroy them and these things, right? This is, if you read the Old Testament. So you can see here, there's no place called Palestine, right? So this is Israel here. This is all of Israel, which used to be partly Palestine. This part here is what's left. There's the Gaza Strip here. But they call all of this Israel. Like this is all considered Israel. It's not part Palestine. Palestinians outnumbered the Israelites something like 2-1, right? That was Israelites were the 1/3, and most of those were immigrants, a lot of them illegal immigrants that came in the beginning. But if you see all the cities here, there are these cities along the coast, and the coast is going to be great. There's the Mediterranean Ocean. There's vacation spots there. This is where you want to live. This is the rich coastal land. And the green part is Palestine, but it's not green. This is all desert, right? Look at the cities. No cities here. This is where all the population is. This is the cities. And these are all, there's Jerusalem here, which is, of course, important. And this is the Dead Sea over here. And this is, Palestine got all this crappy land, right? Going back to this map here, they call this Palestine on this map, but this used to all be Palestine. And, Israel was moving in here towards the coast, but there was a lot of Palestinians that lived here because this is where all the cities were. This is the valuable land by the ocean. You just get better weather there. The rest of this was desert, and the Palestinians were stuck with this garbage land here, and you can see it, right? If there was a topographical map, you'd see this was all dry. This is why there's no cities here. There's nothing over here, right? Again, it's not called Palestine, right? It's just all, this is where the, the good places are to live. And there's people living in houses here by the ocean. And, there was Palestinians and Israelites who were immigrants living together. The Palestinians were rich. They had the best land, some of these people. And they were told to get out, and Israelis moved into their houses. And so the way Kennedy's bringing this up, I'm going to talk about this later. I'm in the editing process. I'm going to talk about later a little bit. It'll get redundant a little bit, but the idea of coastal land being better. But you can see what's happened here. There's nothing out here. Kennedy later on is going to talk about how the Palestinians could leave Israel, but they don't want to. Well, because it's all garbage land. They have to go out to the desert, right? It's like you're in Phoenix, and, Phoenix is an enclosed city, and outside of Phoenix, there's nothing but desert. And they're like, hey, you can leave Phoenix anytime you want. Yeah, but we'll die. It's 120 degrees out there, no air conditioning, no water. And so that's the hypocrisy here of Kennedy's take on all this. And so him getting these numbers wrong, let's go back to that.
Palestine was a large area. It's called the British Mandate. And more than half the people who lived there were Jews. I think it was about 600,000. I think there were about 500,000 Palestinians. I could be wrong about those numbers, and they're probably disputed.
No, you're wrong. You're definitely wrong. And it was called Palestine for a reason, because there's more Palestinians there. And the Jews were emigrating there, and the Palestinians were tolerant of them. They weren't dicks about it. And but it was just they were getting overwhelmed by basically an invading population, what's called a replacement population now, by all these Christians who feel a certain kind of way about Mexicans coming into the country and people from the southern border. Christians who believe that the Palestinians should be kicked out of Israel because that's what their Bible tells them. But they want to build a wall to keep, people from Mexico and South America from immigrating into the U.S., right? So it's all, it's all greasy. It's all, based in your personal belief, right? And Kennedy's personal belief is completely warped here. And in a way that's, this is where it gets really greasy.
Despite that fact, so there were two groups that were due to get land. And 4/5 of the land, because of bigotry against the Jews, 4/5 of that land was given to the Palestinians. It's now called Jordan. And 1/5, a tiny little sliver of traditional land, was given to the Jews. And then there was a series of wars. In 48, Israel became a state. All the nations around it attacked it. And
So that's disputed by, we know about the USS Liberty. But the Jews bombed an American vessel, a communications vessel that would have relayed back that Israel was the aggressor. That's the prevailing theory, right?
Some of them took chunks away. The Gaza Strip was taken, the Judea and Samaria, the West Banks were taken by Jordan, and the Temple Mount was also taken by Jordan. And Israel lived without those for many years, and then those countries all attacked Israel again with an unprovoked attack in 1967. I remember.
Okay, so let's say that was true, and I don't believe that to be true. I think Israel has been the aggressor. They have a very aggressive military. Again, every young Israeli person has to serve in the IDF. So it's mandatory military service, which is completely effed up. Like, that's an effed up thing, right? But let's say that's true. Well, all the Muslim people have a right to be scared. There was this Muslim cleric or something like this, and the guy was kind of prominent in the truth community. Some of my friends who are truthers shared videos of his. And, he was kind of interesting. He was, certainly a Muslim religious guy. He was a religious figure, but he said interesting things. And I watched one of his videos. This is probably, 6-7 years ago. I don't even remember the guy's name. But he said that it says in the Quran that Muslims can get along with Christians and Muslims can get along with Jews. But you should be worried when the Jews and the Christians form an alliance. Like, it was kind of interesting, this, he was talking about the teachings of the Quran. And I'm not being pro-Muslim here, any of these things. I'm just saying this is what the guy's point of view was, right? But the British government and European government was in favor of the Jews leaving the European countries and going to Israel for whatever reason. And they are Christian countries that believe in the, Genesis, the teachings that God gave Israel to the Jews. This is what their belief is. That's what Christian people believe. Because half of Christianity is Judaism. The Old Testament, the book of Genesis is, a part of the Jewish Bible, and it's now a part of the Christian Bible because Jesus was, born a Jew. And so there is, whatever's going on there, collaboration. And the Muslim people, especially when oil, the oil was becoming a precious resource, saw that the European countries and America and all these other countries wanted to take over their countries. And we know that to be true. We saw what happened in Iran. We saw what happened in the Middle East. All of a sudden, these countries that no one cared about had this resource that everybody needed. And so they were rightfully concerned about what happened to the Palestinian people. They were rightfully freaked out. And Kennedy, who is supposed to be a people person and, seer of truth, and he's good at seeing the truth and articulating it in a lot of different ways and things that he's talked about with the environment and stuff he's done with the Native American people, some of the things he's done as a lawyer, and certainly these interviews that he's done. But he's just so far off base here because that's not an accurate assessment. Even if these countries were the aggressors, they have a legitimate claim here. And I'm not saying I'm on one side or the other because I don't care. This is, you guys know my opinion about the whole system collapsing. And so these are just things that people debate and, it's something of the past. It's certainly the present for people, people not in America, not where I live, right? Not where I'm concerned about, but these people all suffer and it's, there's issues here, right? Not that I'm not compassionate for them. I just, this is not going to be something I cover, right? I'm covering it because Kennedy says some atrocious things here.
Sitting with my father.
So this is the part where he talks about his dad, and this is where it gets greasy.
Taken by Jordan, and Israel lived without those for many years, and then those countries all attacked Israel again with a unprovoked attack in 1967. I remember sitting with my father on the patio beside our swimming pool when he got a call from the White House, and somebody on that phone told him that that Syria and Egypt had just attacked Israel, and Jordan would soon join it. Israel said to Jordan, "Please don't attack us, and we won't touch your land. We won't attack you." Jordan attacked anyway.
Why would they do that? Israel had the backing of America and Europe and, the United Nations. And so why would these countries attack them? That's the issue here, right? Because they were going to lose. We know what's happened with America, and we'll get into this with some of the monies and things like this, right? But this is where it gets greasy. I want you to see this one part with Kennedy. But what was their motivation for attacking Israel? Something that was going to backfire, because if they did occupy Israel and they did a genocide, like Kennedy says, they would have been wiped out by American and European forces that were, this was when the British were still in power and had, the British Empire was just sort of collapsing, but not really, because they pivoted, right, and became the British Commonwealth. But America was a dominant military force, and they wanted the oil, America wanted the oil in these various countries. And so, we saw what happened afterwards, right? And, maybe they were stupid. That's debatable. But it would be stupid for them to attack Israel. And anybody can see it, right? Israel was in the power position here because they were backed by the UN. They were backed by the prevailing governments in the U.S. and these other countries, right, in Europe.
And as a result of that, my father, I remember I said to my father, how can Israel survive? Because the land owned by the Arabs is 600 times the land owned by Israel. It's a tiny, tiny little sliver, 20, 25, 20 miles across. I said, how can they survive with all these giant nations attacking them? And he said to me, the Israelis are tough, which was the highest accolade that he could give anybody. So I understood his admiration for them.
Okay, so let me break over to the voiceover. So this is where it gets really greasy for me. It's a real bummer because I don't have to vote, right? And I was never going to vote again. And you guys who watch my videos, the left-right paradigm, all the reasons I've talked about. And I believe the system should collapse and, all these things. And the reason that I was supporting Kennedy, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do now or whatever. I'm like, this is just me verbalizing. I'm dealing with what's happened here, right? And the reason that I'm supporting Kennedy, I have so many people view my stuff here. Most of them knew about Kennedy before me. Most of you guys had already made your decision one way or another. I'm not much of an influencer in terms of what's going to happen. But, I have a spiritual component that, I don't like to talk about it, but it carries some weight, right? In terms of my spiritual, whatever it is, the energy that I've accumulated, the spiritual capital that I've accumulated over the years from doing the Sajmark system. And so there's that. Like that has some influence or whatever it is. Not in the way that people think of influencers today, but on a spiritual level. And, Kennedy was the way he was presenting himself and being authentic. And I still think those, I'm not saying that he wasn't authentic. I talk about retroactively sucking. When you have a franchise like Marvel, and I just covered that on my other channel, and they make, they pivot and they make bad choices and they destroy their universe. I talked about this with Star Wars. The Star Wars movies weren't great. But until the last three, their level was, let's say, a 3 out of 10, a 4 out of 10. But the last three movies made all those other movies in the whole Star Wars universe a 1 out of 10, right? That's retroactively sucking, where you suck, in the present, and it wipes out all the good things you did in the past. And this interview with RFK borders on that, destroying his credibility in the truth community, destroy his ability to be seen as an authentic politician and somebody that you could trust his judgment. And that's what I was saying about RFK. Like, I liked the way that he thought about things and presented himself as a reasonable person that would would be a fair person and, a reasonable leader. Like, I liked the way that he thought about things. And it was open to various opinions and these other things, right? And the way that he's handled this Israeli-Palestine thing, he's torpedoed all of that. Like, he's destroyed his credibility. And I don't mind him backing Israel or having to do damage control with these claims of anti-Semitism. Like, he did it in the beginning of his statement when he was first accused of being an anti-Semite, right? When he was accused by, when he said that stuff about the Ashkenazi Jews and the Chinese are less likely to die of COVID. And he said that this could be a biologically targeted weapon, right? Which he didn't say for sure. He said there's an argument to be made. And, that wasn't an anti-Semitic comment because some of it was based in scientific fact, according to the reports. I didn't read the reports, but the Republicans entered in studies that showed, at least we know the Chinese were less likely to die of COVID than other peoples. And this was in America. these were Chinese in America. They were even less likely. The Chinese people suffered less from COVID than the Americans did, right? So there's that. I don't know about the Ashkenazi Jews, but I think that was part of the study. And Kennedy was quoting from a study. So it wasn't anti-Semitic, and clearly his position here, he says he's defended Israel and he's loved Israel and he's thinking a beacon of light. This is what he's viewed Israel as, historically, and as he's, whatever it might be. And one of the things about Kennedy is he talks about how he comes up with his points of view. And he brings his father into it a lot, his family, conversation he's had, and being around his uncle and his father when he was a teenager, and seeing, how they conducted themselves and, their family values and their family views on whatever's going on in the world. And he does a good job with this, and it's compelling. And I like listening to it. I have in the past. But what he just did here, bringing his father into this abomination of a position, which is, again, like maybe it's not as bad as I think it is. Like I'm not an expert in this, but I know he's wrong. Like he knows he's wrong. And this story says where, Papa, how are the Israelis going to survive, Papa? Papa, they only have 25 miles of land, Papa. Papa, I don't see how they will survive, Papa. Papa, tell me, Papa. Son, these Israelis are tough, right? Like, it's ridiculous. It's like, it's mockable because it's ridiculous, right? Papa, how are these Israelis going to survive, Papa? Like this weird story he has. And the problem I have with it, and I was talking about this with my wife, I don't mind if he has different opinions of things or different positions, or any of these guys, any of these presidential candidates. But what's been good about him is his authenticity, that I, believe in him in terms of his thought process and him being transparent and being authentic. But here he's either a massive failure and a complete, a failure in his judgment, or he's being an absolute liar. And again, I don't mind if he came out and said, I support Israel and all these things, because that's what he would have had to do as a politician. I don't care. Like, that's not, I wouldn't have, this video wouldn't even exist if he said so, because he said that when he was in the Senate committee. And if that's the position he wants to take, that's fine. Like, that's up to him. Like, whatever. And I can vote for him or not, or, but it wasn't certainly a deal breaker for me. I didn't even care about it. And he said things that I didn't agree with, but it wasn't, like I said, a deal breaker. But what he's done here is he's called into question the one thing that he had going for him, was that he was authentic and that he was somebody with sound judgment that you could trust with the position of president. And now you can't trust him. Like, somebody I would have trusted before I heard this position, and now I don't trust him. And, I give away trust freely because I'm not going to be hurt if you betray my trust, because I expect it, right? Like, I expect you're going to betray my trust, Like, I expect people are going to turn on me or, whatever it is. And, I can take the hit, the pain of that. Like, I can say I trust you or whatever. I'm, of course, cautious and cynical, but I can open myself up to trusting people. And I do it regularly because, I've suffered things that have hurt my heart, and I've survived them, in terms of things that are much greater. Like, you guys who know a little bit about, you guys who watch my Journey series know a lot more about this than the people who don't. But the greatest person I ever met was Master Chargy, the third master of the Sajmark system. And I could never, I'd made a video, The Greatest Man I Ever Known, and he was just this, wonderful, spiritual, saintly person. And, he made mistakes, and there are things that I saw that, his human side showed. But he was commitment to doing work for the divine force, the divine movement for God. And the spiritual movement of Sajmark was something that you would have to experience. And I could never do justice to it. And the system itself has transformed me in ways that I can't ever explain. And, the transmission that's given and the cleaning of some scaras and the whole process. It's wonderful. Like, I can't say enough good things about it. And you guys know I talked about it quite a bit. And then he had a successor named Kamlesh Patel, who's now known as Daji, who I had positive experiences with, who had, been taking an interest in me and had done spiritual work on me or whatever. He was like, an elder brother in the system, and somebody who I saw be transformed into the future master. And the spiritual work in Saj Marg is so profound, but it happens on an internal level, and it's so subtle. Most people can't see it, but it is, when you can see it, it is remarkable. It's miraculous, right? And I expected him to do a good job. And he has pooped the bed. Like, he has destroyed the initiative of heartfulness that he's created, and he has torpedoed something that I love, right? And I would have never expected him to do that. It was hard for me to accept after I saw the work that he had. He was a committed person to the Sajmark system and all these things. And it was painful. And those of you guys who've listened to the Journey series, it's painful for me to see this happen to the system that I believe is the solution to humanity. This is my hope for humanity as a spiritual one. And, he was a much better practitioner of the system than I am. He was more committed to it. He was a better Abhyasi, which is what we were called, aspirants, spiritual aspirants. But he failed. His epic failure has been embarrassing. And I've mocked him for it and, all these things. Because it's necessary to do that because of, what he's done here. And that's, was painful for me to go through, but the truth is the truth. You can't run away from it. And I had to deal with it, right? I'm on some level, I'm a truth seeker, a spiritual seeker, as somebody who is seeking the truth, the divine truth. And very few people in the truth community are actual truth seekers because they don't want to look at the things that are painful to them. And so that's far more painful than, some politician, or in this case, Kennedy, betraying my trust or your trust or whatever it is. Because he's asking for our trust. A political figure, that's what Trump is, all these guys, Biden, he's asking you to trust him to be the steward, to be the, the president of America and, guide this country. Of course, they got handlers, all that stuff, right? But a candidate is asking for your trust. And Kennedy's making the truth circuit, going on these various podcasts and reaching out to all of us who don't believe in the official story. And he's done a great job. I've been very happy listening to him. I think he is a compelling, personality and figure here. And he's been very open and transparent about his life and his, drug use and, his, like he said to his wife that he has so many skeletons in his closet and things like this. He has a lot of personal character issues and things he's overcome. He was an addict. And, the way he talks about his family and all these things. And he's just torpedoed this by taking this horrific position. And there's more to come here. But let me say this part about it because it's essential. So all this stuff I presented here about the history of Palestine, I'm not an expert. And, there's details in everything that people get wrong. The numbers can be fudged, whatever it is, right? The people who dislike Jewish people are going to come on one side. And the people who, who like Judaism and are in favor of Israel are going to see things one way. Your lens is going to corrupt your vision, and you can cherry pick statistics. We've seen this with everything, right? And so, like I said, I'm not an expert on this, but I feel like I've given a fairly accurate and fair assessment of what I've read here, these statistics and these reports and things, and, my position on this. Again, you guys have probably never heard me talk about Israel or Palestine. It's not something I cover here. I have a lot of Jewish friends or people in my history. I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut, where 40% of the people are Jewish. And there was a synagogue next to Beth David Synagogue next to the St. Thomas Church that I went to when I was a kid. And the synagogue had hills on it. I remember going to catechism like on Saturday, religious training, and they were coming out of like whatever the Sabbath was, their religious services. And my Jewish friends and my Catholic friends would be up there playing King of the Mountain on these hills in front of the church, in front of the synagogue, right? You know, I grew up. I had numerous Jewish friends. I went to my friend's bar mitzvah. His dad was a farmer. He had cattle. My friend gave me a couple of cow horns that they had, severed from the cow's head. And I used to go over his house and we played football and things like this. I didn't think anything of it. I had a Jewish friend who was a fireman. He was one of my basketball friends and, my basketball buddies when I played basketball. And he and I started a YMCA basketball team. And I hung out with him and his friends. And, he was a part of my, my basketball group when I was at my second attempt at college. And he's one of the few people that still contacts me. He occasionally listens to my videos and says my friends do. He's tried to get me to come to, some of these, they have these reunions. They go to Hilton Head and play golf. I know, I'm not a big golfer. And I reminisce. I get a little bit sentimental, but, I moved on with my life or whatever. But he's one of the few people in my past that still tries to reach out and contact me. Of course, this guy, Fred, the preceptor who, was born a Jewish, became a hippie, and he went to India and started Sajmarg, met Babaji and, Charji and these things. And he's the guy who gave me my initial sittings. So I have a connection with Jewish people and Jewish community, and it's mostly a positive one. In fact, I don't have any negative interactions with Jewish people. And, it bothers me when I get people here that, hate all Jews because I have friends and people who, have been a positive part of my life who come from the Jewish tradition, right? And I have, people who are, black and gay and, Indian, of course, from, all these different demographics I've interacted with. Hispanic people when I lived in New Mexico, some Native American people, things like this. I have interactions with various people from various demographics, and most of them have been positive. And the negative interactions, I don't view as being a part of like a culture, like a group of people, a demographic. Like it's person to person, right? And so I don't have like some deep-seated prejudice or negativity towards these groups of people. Like whatever. There are some stereotypes are true, and there's things like that. But, I don't, get into that. It's not my thing. I don't certainly cover it here. I'm more about a person's soul, the kind of person they are, than, what they look like on the outside, the color of their skin, or their, religious beliefs and these things. Of course, those things shape a person. So, I don't get into this stuff, right? And I feel like I've given a fair assessment. But again, I'm not an expert in the, Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And so I can say I don't know these things factually, but this is a reasonable, narrative that I've created here in this video, and what I believe about this whole thing. But what condemns Kennedy here, what screws him, what he screwed himself with his position is he is going through something that we all know exists. And that is you can't criticize Israel and Jewish people. You can't. I mean, you can, but it's a forbidden type of situation in the mainstream media, and he just experienced it, right? So here's a guy who's just blamed all the Muslims and the Arab people. He's said that they're the bad guys and Israel is the good guys, right? And he has talked about Palestinian being murderous and wanting to commit genocide against the Israeli people, the Muslims there. And he's hammered the Palestinian people and blamed them for being on Jewish land, or whatever his position is here, right? The majority of the people there were Palestinian who were on, God's given Israel to the Jews, but they weren't there, but they had to kick the Palestinians out, right? All of that. But other than the criticism from Max Blumenthal and some of you guys and whatever, this isn't being covered by the mainstream media. But when Kennedy said non-anti-Semitic things, one of them was based in a scientific study, but the other one, even more perplexing, was he used two numbers given to him by somebody who protects the rich and famous and is a known entity at the club and is Jewish himself, who took full responsibility for the numbers. the numbers of 14 and 88 that Kennedy used in his tweet that were considered, some sort of hate numbers. And Kennedy was never given an apology. The mainstream media covered it, and he had to address it. But he said these things about Palestinians, and there's nobody really out there of any sort of authority that is talking about this. So he should know, right? Like, he's talking about how you can talk truth in Israel and you can criticize the government. But, we've all experienced it. That, there's a saying that many people in the truth community use, who your owners are. It's the people you're not allowed to criticize. And Americans are not allowed to criticize Israel and the Jewish people. And we saw this with Kyrie Irving, who just posted something on Twitter that was considered anti-Semitic, but the Amazon, that's run by a Jewish businessman, is allowing it to be up on Amazon. The Hebrews to Negroes video, which is not very good. It's a horrible video. It's poorly done. But Kyrie Irving shared it, and he was condemned. He had to pay, millions of dollars in fines, and he lost. He was just hammered. He was suspended for 5 games and all of it by a Jewish commissioner. He was hammered by the ADL and these other organizations the same way Kennedy is. But you could say, you can say anything about the Palestinians. Jamie Foxx, who posted a tweet which was condemned, and he was called anti-Semitic, shortly after dying. He said they killed this dude named Jesus. What do you think they'll do to you? Fake friends, fake love. And then he said, I apologize to the Jewish community, everyone who's been offended by my post. I now know my choice of words have caused offense, and I'm sorry. This was never my intent. To clarify, I was betrayed by a fake friend, and what I meant with they, not anything more. That's what I meant by they, not anything more. He meant that he was betrayed. They will kill Jesus, like he was saying fake friends will. That's what he says the post was. And that actually kind of fits here. I have only love in my heart for everyone. I love and support the Jewish community. My deepest apologies to anyone who was offended. Nothing but love, always, Jamie Foxx. And so Jamie Foxx posted a very vague type of, I could see why people would think they is Jewish people, because the idea here is that Christians say that Jews killed Jesus. And, there is whatever you want to say about the Bible in terms of this interpretation is historically there is some evidence that the people who ran the, whatever they were called, that group of people that ran the Jewish organization, religion back then. But it was called the Pharisees. They weren't very happy with Jesus. And there are some, whatever, the story being that they were a part of Jesus' death, right? And there are a lot of Christians, they say a lot of the Jewish hate that's out there comes from Christians who say the Jews killed Jesus. So this is a big thing they call blood libel in the Jewish tradition. But if you said the Palestinians killed Jesus, it would be okay, right? Like you could say anything about the Palestinians and there's no backing them. And we'll get into the monetary compensation in a bit when Kennedy gets to that, but it's completely warped. It's one-sided, right? All the support goes to Israel. All the love goes to Israel. And the Israeli government has a strong lobbying group. And all these politicians have to sign onto a piece of paper that says, we support Israel. And ones who haven't, one person, Cynthia McKinney, this is where I'm getting this information from, says that she didn't sign this piece of paper that she pledged to defend Israel as a congresswoman from Georgia. And she said the pro-Israel lobby poured millions of dollars into her opponent's campaign, and she lost her seat because of it. And so this is coming from her, and this is kind of like a known, aspect, which Kennedy would know. But again, I can't prove that. But what we can prove is that Kennedy was wrongfully accused of anti-Semitism. And he has said things that were what I consider hateful to the Palestinian people and slanderous to the Palestinian people. And he's not going to catch anything from this. He's going to lose support in the truth community, and maybe they don't realize it, which is carrying him right now. Like the truthers, without the truthers, Kennedy's screwed. Like he has no chance. And he's torpedoed his support by saying this. And for me, it isn't his position as much of his judgment and his, not being authentic, because he can't, he knows that there's this victim consciousness, which all of us know about, that if you criticize Jewish people, you are, and Israel specifically, in a non-racist way, in a non-anti-Semitic way, in just calling them out on their behaviors, and you say anything negatively about Israel, you are slammed in the media and condemned by all these people and all these groups, right? In ways that other groups, you can criticize them in the same way and you won't be condemned. Everybody knows it. You know it. I know it. Everybody knows it. And the victim consciousness that pervades, it's all pervading in our world now, where everybody's a victim. And my view on this thing, where I am, much more of an expert than most people, and my understanding of samskaras, which, most people don't even, maybe have heard about, but don't even understand this idea of things that you do that are impressions, your beliefs, your egotistical, your egotistical creation is what you take with you from this life. And if it's contaminated, if it's, if you're an addict or whatever it might be, you come into this life with these samskaras that have to be burned off and worked off in terms of, clearing your connection to the divinity within you. There are obstructions to your divinity, your connection with God and your soul. And your soul creates your life and the circumstances around your life to clean these things off. But any religious person, anybody who believes in God, believes that God has a plan. And whole religions believe that God's will, like when they say that it's God's will that that God has given Israel to the Jewish people and that they're the chosen people, that's part of their belief system, right? And if you believe in God, that God is there and you're the chosen people, then God is watching over you. And everything that you get is from God. You're not a victim of other people. You're not a victim of the Holocaust. You're not a victim of the, anything that happens in terms of people. God did that to you, right? That's what godly people believe, right? The Native Americans, whatever it is. Like there's an excellent, I'm talking about all peoples. We all have to eat poop in our lives. We all have to eat crap. There's abusive people, there's abusive governments, there's bad things that happen. And people make mistakes or do bad things. People victimize other people and victimize animals, the environment. People impose their will and they make bad choices, non-divine choices and things. And they do hurtful and evil things. People do evil. Yeah, that's true. But you either believe there's a plan or there isn't. That there's an order to things. That God's will be done here on planet Earth. That there are divine forces working towards some sort of, divine goal. And those people who don't believe in God don't believe in a plan. They believe in chaos. And for them, there is victimization, right? But if there's chaos, then there are no rules. And so there's no victimization because chaos is without rules. Chaos is without morals. Chaos is without ethics. And so it's a dog-eat-dog, survival of the fittest type of situation, right? Whoever's the strongest, whoever's the most violent, whoever's whatever wins. But if you believe in God and the divine plan, you believe that there's a plan. And that everything that you get when you become a spiritual person comes from God. And so you don't get mad at the person who's crapping all over you. You don't get mad at the people that are imposing their will. You don't get mad at Biden. You don't get mad at Trump. You don't get mad at RFK Jr. You don't get mad at the media. You don't get mad at your wife. You don't get mad at your husband. You don't get mad at your kids. You say, God, why are you doing this to me, right? When Jesus said, Father, why art thou forsaken me? He wasn't saying, why did the Romans or why did the Jews or why did my disciples or why did my followers, why did all these people crucify me? Jesus is, hanging on the cross, and he says, Father, why art thou forsaken me? Why did you do this to me, Father? Right? Why did you do this to me? Not these other MNFers out here spitting on me, throwing stuff at me, not the Pontius Pilate, not Judas, not Peter who, denied him, not Thomas who doubted him, not, all the people that screwed him over. And there are plenty of them, right? Spitting on him, torturing him, whipping him. He said, Father, why did you let this happen? I'm Jesus, right? You're my Father. I'm your, divine Son. That's what his perspective was. Why did you forsake me? Not these other MNFers. Why did you forsake me? Why did you do this to me? So if you get mad at your treatment in the world and you're a spiritual person, you say, God, why are you allowing this to happen? And God would show you. I'm not being unfair to you. This is a blessing. In the Sagemark teaching, the idea of miseries is divine blessings because it cleans some scars and brings you closer to God. And so any religion that claims victim consciousness and how they're being persecuted is denying God's authority. They're saying God wants us to be treated fairly, but this other group is imposing their will. And the Jewish community, the Jewish, not every person in it, but Israel and these other groups. In fact, I've seen this video where there's an elderly woman, a Jewish woman, talking about how victim consciousness and using the Holocaust and using these things are ways to gain power, manipulate people, play the guilt card, right, for what happened to them. I mean, that's why there's so many movies about the Holocaust. There's blood libel and these things, that the Jews are they're perpetual victims of the Christians that hate them and the Muslims that hate them or whatever. But God's constantly punishing the Jews. If you read the part of the Old Testament, it's about the Exodus of Moses, and he punishes Moses, who's been a good, good champion of God, and a leader for God, and he craps on Moses. The way God's presented in the Old Testament is not God. God is petty, narcissistic. I've talked about this so much. That's not how God is. God is loving. God isn't vengeful. God isn't wrathful. God doesn't punish. We punish ourselves. But the Jewish people, the people who are in charge of the Jewish religion, are constantly saying they're being victimized by people and not blaming God for their treatment. But God is clearly punishing people throughout their belief system. They believe in a punishing God. I mean, just read the Old Testament. God's punishing the Jews. He's punishing the Canaanites. He's telling the Jews to kill the Canaanites. He's, all these things. Not just the Canaanites. It's all that's the one that's the one I remember. But God's a wrathful God, and God punishes, right? And again, if you believe in God, then everything comes from God. Then there's a plan. There's an order that if you feel mistreated, go complain to God. Ultimately, every spiritual person has to learn to do that. I just took a walk. I mean, this is already 30 minutes. This is going to be like a 2-3 hour video. And I'm glad I started yesterday because I'm already, I couldn't have done this in one day. I still have to edit the parts that are clips, and that's going to take me some time. I don't listen to the voiceovers anymore. I used to. See what I'm talking about here? The victim consciousness. Well, let me read this quote because I thought this was important. People accuse me of being hateful or whatever, but I'm not, because I don't allow hate to exist in my eternal system, inside myself, because it makes me feel bad. It has nothing to do with other people. It has nothing to do with me not being hateful to other people. I don't want hate inside my system. Hate sucks to have. It's like a poison, right? There's this saying that being resentful is like swallowing a poison pill and expecting your enemy to die. And I've talked about this specifically. Let me read this this comment from this quote from Master Charji, Parthasarthi Rajakapalachari. And unfortunately it says heartfulness.org on it. And it shouldn't, because it's Sahaj Mark. Heartfulness is now corrupted, but when I made this, when I put that in there, there's probably something I copied from somewhere. But it's, anyways, whenever you hate something, look in yourself and try to find it and remove it from within. Then you will not hate anything anymore. When you're afraid of something, look inside yourself, remove it from inside, and you will not be afraid of anything in the universe after that. And so this comes from a story that Master Charji told. This is part of it, that he went to see Babaji, his spiritual master and guide. And he started talking to Babaji about a guy at work he just hated. Like every time he looked at the guy, he would feel hatred. He just hated this guy. And this was when Master Charji was, being prepared to be Babaji's successor, and he had risen to high levels of spiritual attainment. And when your inner world gets purified, you become more and more of a vacuum, because there's basically nothing inside your internal world. When you become a saint, that's why saints fall. And when you have a little bit of a slip, it can contaminate this whole area. It's like a clean, innocent, internal world. And if you let something like hatred or envy or any negative condition come into you, anger and fear and these things, it can contaminate your whole system in a short period of time. And Babaji said to him, you got to throw that hate out of your system. At your level of approach, I mean, no one should have it, but certainly where you are now, you can't let it contaminate your system. Take the hate and throw it out of inside yourself. He didn't say go, yell at the guy, or he didn't say anything about the guy, because that's the object of your hate. The hate that you have is inside yourself. So if you hate Biden, if you hate Jews, if you hate Christians, you hate Muslims, you hate, Trump, you hate any RFK Jr., you hate me, you hate anybody, right? That's your hate. It's the hate that's inside of you. The object of your hate is whatever it is, right? And maybe the people that you hate are horrible people, and in some ways they deserve to be hated, but still it's your hate. Like, you can justify your hate, but it's your hate. It's what you feel inside yourself. And when you have hate, when you feel hate inside yourself, almost anything else is better. Like fear feels better than hate, and anger feels better than hate, and certainly love feels better than hate. And so for that reason, I don't hate anybody, right? I don't allow that to exist in my internal condition. This doesn't come from hate, despite all the negativity, all the mocking I do, all the things I say about people. I don't hate people because it's not good for me. And, I don't, I cover things here, but I try not to cover groups that are hated or targeted because, for one, you're not supposed to on YouTube. But the more important piece is there's just all these haters. Like if I say anything negative about Israel, I'll get all these people who hate Jews coming up on my channel, and I don't want them here, right? I don't, I'm not down with that. I'm not down with white supremacists and any of these things. The QBs, all these people. Emotionally irrational people are not welcome here. Psychologically, challenged people are not welcome here because I don't want that energy here. And when the energy's there, it just contaminates the comment section, and it just, the energy in these videos and these people. So, I don't do any of those things, right? And, now that I'm critical of Kennedy, I'm not turning on him in some hateful way. And people who have been negative about Kennedy, see, you're admitting we're right or whatever. Like, that's not what's going on here. I believe in Kennedy's earlier work and the work that he's done, either as a lawyer, but his interviews and things, and his presentation as a person. And then he's had a mistaken moment here, which could cost him certainly my support and your support. We'll see how this all plays out, right? And I'll get back to that in a moment with Kennedy. What he did here, which is in terms of losing his credibility. And so there is these policies of hate speech on YouTube. And it says here, YouTube does protect the community from hate and harassment. We have developed hate speech and harassment policies in consultation with our creators who share their perspective, as well as expert organizations that study online bullying and the spread of hateful ideas. We have also met with organizations from all sides of the political spectrum, not truthers. They have not met with truthers, and that's going to be a big part of this. And as with our approach to other policies violate content, we work quickly to remove content that violates our hate and harassment policies. What is the difference between hate speech and harassment? Our hate speech policy protects specific groups and members of those groups. We remove policy violative content. We consider content hate speech when it incites hatred or violence against groups based on protected attributes such as age, gender, race, caste, religion, sexual orientation, or veteran status. This policy also includes common forms of online hate, such as dehumanizing members of these groups, characterizing them as inherently inferior or ill, promoting hateful ideology like Nazism, promoting conspiracy theories about these groups, or denying well-documented violent events took place, like a school shooting. So that's hate speech, and then they get into the harassment. Our harassment policy protects identifiable individuals, and we remove policy violative content. We consider content harassment when it targets an individual with prolonged or malicious insults based on intrinsic attributes, including their protected group status or physical traits. This policy also includes, my dogs started to bark. This policy also includes harmful behavior such as deliberately insulting or shaming minors, threats, bullying, doxing, or encouraging abusive fan behavior. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because of the protected group status, because behaviors are behaviors. And there is bullying and harassment and intimidation and, hate speech that we suffer as truthers, so-called conspiracy theorists. And we're a group based on our, a lot of things that we say are right. It's just, not endorsed by the official story. There's more truth in the truth community than there is in the official story. But we're punished for saying things that go against the official story. Our so-called conspiracy theory can be, we can lose our channels, we can be deplatformed, we can get strikes, we can be demonetized, and we are generally harassed, and people can say anything about us, right? And I'm not saying this to be a victim, I'm just stating facts, that we're not a protected group. And people can say anything about anti-vaxxers, they can call us murderers, they can say anything about our various positions, and we hear it all the time. We hear it from the official story, we hear it from the mainstream media, we hear it all over social media, we get it in the comment section, we get it everywhere. But we can't say the same sort of things. People can be hateful to us, and we can't be hateful back. And I'm not advocating being hateful back. I'm just saying it's a one-sided type situation. And Kennedy, Bobby, for what he's done so far, is that he has exhibited, or he has been, he's experienced these behaviors. He has been targeted as a truther. He has been harassed as an anti-vaxxer. He's been called all kinds of various names and things like this. He has been slandered with the false accusations of being anti-Semitic. He has been censored, and he has been, bullied, and they are rigging the election against him because of his views. And he shows you the way that we're treated. He's an example of how truthers are treated. And whether you think he's a legitimate truther or he's on your level of truther or whatever it is, he has been a truther in these areas. And he's suing YouTube for it. And he's pushed back against all of these ways that he's been censored. He's gone and testified in front of Congress, and it's something I covered here about censorship, right? Censored by the Biden administration, all these things. I have experienced censorship like the rest of you. And what I do when I'm censored is I accept it. Like, I don't thumb my nose at the rules and try to, talk about things I'm not allowed to talk about. I accept that if I want to be on YouTube, that's just the way it is. I don't get into it. I don't, very seldom do I talk about it here. My channel is being squeezed out of existence by YouTube in terms of their policies to rig the game against us in favor of CNN and Fox and MSNBC's, news organizations that nobody wants to watch. People watch my video and they'll get a Fox video afterwards in the autoplay, right? I'm not being recommended. I've talked about this. I'm not making as much money, and I've been a, loyal contributor to YouTube for years. and YouTube is mistreating me. Again, I'm not a victim, like I've said before. This is, if I'm mad, I get mad at God. If I feel I've been ill-treated, if anything, I'll go to God, right? But that's what YouTube's doing, and it's not cool. And they don't protect us, a group that is clearly, we don't have any sort of organization. We don't have a lobbying group. We don't have anybody out there fighting for us and our rights. And why are we a protected group? Because we have shared beliefs, and our beliefs are attacked regularly. The same kind of behaviors, harassment behaviors, bullying behaviors, are okay to do to us, but not to other people, right? And so let's say, talking about you're talking about the boop, right? Medical misinformation, talking about Pfizer and these other groups and these, that have influence, financial influence, and we have nothing. Remember, Peter Hotez was sounding like a victim because the crazy conspiracy theorists are so bullying him. But, we don't have an organization, and Pfizer can buy and pay for all these people, right? But when I couldn't talk about the boop anymore, I didn't talk about it. And then YouTube seemed to loosen up on their policies, and I talked about it. And I got 2 community guideline strikes on my other channel that have now, passed, are gone. So that was months ago. But I've gotten a number of community guideline strikes for talking about medical misinformation, some of which were retroactive and things I talked about years and years ago. So I stopped talking about it. But what I didn't do is say that the boops are good for you, right? I didn't go out and say, oh, yeah, I was wrong all along. The boops are good for you. Like, I couldn't talk about it. I was censored. Fine. I have to accept it. But I'm not going to reverse my position to go with the powers that be. And that's what RFK Jr. has done here. Because he's fought against all these other things to do with the anti-boop stuff and all the rest of the stuff, right? He's pushed back against it. He's suing YouTube over it, right? For wrongfully censoring him and other people with their bogus medical misinformation policies. But when he was accused of anti-Semitism, he came out and rewrote history and crapped all over the Palestinian people and all the people in the truth community that know better. And then try to say, let me mansplain to you guys about the true history of Israel. And we know, you experienced bullying by them, by this group that comes out and won't allow you to talk about them. You're talking about them being, for liberty and free speech, and yet these groups here in America won't let you rightfully criticize them, or even hint at criticizing them, and the system backs them completely. YouTube backs them, social media backs them, the U.S. government backs them, the media backs them, the regular mainstream media, and they have a stranglehold on your ability to say things or question them as a group of people or as individuals. And anything you say, you're considered anti-Semitic and you're using hate speech. And that's, not cool. It's manipulative. It's wrong. This idea of victim consciousness, when it goes against their whole belief in God, that God punishes people. God punishes them. God punishes groups of people. But no, this thing is, is something beyond God, right? And it's not even consistent with their own biblical teachings, their own beliefs about God. And so for that, Kennedy sucks in this instance. Because instead of talking truth about this and saying that this is wrong, they're calling everything anti-Semitic, he goes on this rabbi show and slanders Muslim people and the Palestinian people and all the people like Max Blumenthal and all these other people who are, research this. And it's not cool, right? Like, it's a real bummer that he did this. Like, it's questioning his integrity, questioning his... And again, like, all you guys who hated him all along, I don't want to hear your boop. You don't comment. Like, I don't want to hear it. Because, before he had done a good job. He'd done a good job for a political candidate. And like I said, I don't begrudge him having to reverse some of these things and not talk about them, because he couldn't be viewed as an anti-Semite and get elected. We saw how they did Trump and, all the Trumpers and things. And Trump thumbing his nose at them didn't work. Trump being a douche about it didn't work. It just made things worse. Like him embracing white supremacists. So I didn't want him to be combative about it. I didn't want him to go after the ADL or any of these groups. Like, he's got to do what's best for him politically, but he shouldn't, and he didn't have to just crap all over the Palestinians and make them like some kind of villain when they're not. Like, if anything, the Palestinians are victims. Like I said, I don't believe in victims, but certainly in this situation, the Palestinians are not the aggressors. They're not the wrongdoers. They were wronged. And there's video evidence to prove it out there. All right, let's get back to the interview here. Okay, so Bobby is going to say a few more things here. This video is going to be like 3-4 hours long. Lucky I've been taking this echinacea golden seal spray for my throat and doing other things for my throat. I found a way to... I've had tonsils that have been swollen for like a couple of years. And I'm not sure why. I think it has related to COVID, but also my voice is constantly getting strained from talking too much in these videos. But luckily today my voice feels good. My tonsil swelling has gone down, like it seems to be working. But anyways, I just got to wrap this thing up either way.
The Israelis won that war by a miracle, and they took back the Temple Mount, which was theirs. It was their part of the mandate. They took the West Bank, and they took the Gaza Strip, and they gave and the Golan Heights. And then the UN resolution and the Israel government said, we will give those lands all back to the countries from which they took, even though we won them fairly in a war.
We won them fairly. We won them fairly fair and square in a war.
Even though they are part of our historical lands, we will trade land for peace. If you promise that you won't attack us anymore, we will give you back that land.
I don't think anybody believes this but him and the people who are here, this rabbi. But, this is really bad, right? Like just...
And Egypt agreed and got the Golan Heights back. And Syria. Got the Sinai, and Syria agreed and got the Golan Heights. But Jordan wouldn't agree. And again, the Israelis have negotiated with the Palestinians at Camp David, and again and again, the Israelis have offered to make giant concessions and give back all the land if there would be peace. And every time the Palestinians refused, Prince Bandar, who was at Camp David and who was from Saudi Arabia, the Prince of Saudi Arabia, who was the referee at Camp David, said it was 100% the fault of Yasser Arafat. They would not take the most generous concessions. And that brings us to where we are today, which is that young Palestinians are being taught to murder Jews in the schools. And some 80% of the Palestinian people, when they're polled in poll after poll, says that it is okay to murder Jews, individual Jews, that Israel has no right to exist, and that ultimately it must be destroyed. Oh, Israel, listen, when our country was during World War II, we have a big country. It's very, very hard to invade us. And during World War II, every country, when it's under national security threat, it imposes restrictions on citizens. You become something of a national security state.
Okay, so he's talking about martial law. I want to mention one other thing. He has this documentary thing he's doing now where he's gone to the southern border, the Mexican border, and he's slamming the Democrats' handling of the border crisis, and that border needs to be secure, much like the Republicans feel. And, this was an immigration issue for the Palestinians, where the Palestinian allowed or were forced to accept hundreds of thousands of Jewish immigrants in a short period of time. And now they've lost their country, right? And again, I'm not getting into any of this stuff in terms of I'm not an expert on this, whatever's going on here. He clearly is just lying or making things up, or he's got a distorted view, or he's pandering, or whatever he's doing here. And it's, hard to listen to. But he's actually talking about, the border crisis in America, and then rearranging history of what happened to the Palestinians when they were, there's a country called Palestine that really doesn't exist anymore, right? Israel exists and Palestine doesn't.
We put Japanese in concentration camps who did nothing in World War II. Israel has not done that. Israel takes precautions.
You could say that all of Palestine is a concentration camp. Let's go back to the map here. So you see the way that Palestine is broken up here in all these areas. That means that they have to pass through Israeli territory. I saw something, one of the videos I sent my wife was the IDF had to escort these kids to school on a free road through settlement territories that have, legal settlements that have sprung up in Palestine. And these kids were getting harassed. Palestinian kids were getting harassed. Adult Jewish people were throwing rocks at them. And the IDF had to intervene and escort these kids to school. But the rest of the people who didn't have an escort couldn't use the road. And the road was, one of the few roads that they needed to use. You understand this because their lands are divided here. And so these are little concentration camps. These are little reservations. Hitler used America's reservations of the Native Americans as a model for his concentration camps, right? And this has been done here in America, again, with the Japanese in World War II. And these are divided peoples here. They have this one little strip here, and they have to go through Israeli land. And you see it's all covered in barbed wire. And, if you look at these videos, there's barbed wire and soldiers everywhere. And these, imagine what it's like to go through airport security, but 100 times worse every day, where you're considered a lesser than person, which the Palestinians are. And you're hated, and you're considered terrorists and murderers. All this stuff that RFK Jr. is saying here, a million Palestinians, to support this worldview, right?
Palestinians who live in Israel vote and they participate. They're not called to the army. They're not required to serve like other people are. I'll say one other thing.
So what do you think? They got a good deal? You saying the Palestinians have a great deal?
During the Oslo Accords, one of the agreements during the Oslo Accords was that Palestinians had a right to return, who lived in Israel, had a right to return to Palestine. And they assumed that hundreds of thousands of them would do so, and they would be given land in Palestine. And they would live under the Palestinian Authority. There's a lot of empty land in Palestine, and they were given the right to
It's not good land, right? Go
there. It was assumed hundreds of thousands of them would take advantage of that offer, but only 4,000 went.
So let's go back to the map. See, this is the coastal area, right? And there's a body of water over here. I don't know what this is, some sort of a lake. And there's a body of water down here, it looks like. And the Palestinians have a small part of the coast. This is where the ocean is. So I already covered this. You guys heard me talk about this earlier. I edited that in. I'm going to cut this part short here because the video's so long. But you get the idea. They got the desert, right? They got the, cheap reservation land. And the Israelites, the Jewish people, got the choice land, even though a lot of them were illegal immigrants that came into that country fairly recently. And, this is why Palestinian, the Arabs, feel a certain kind of a way about the whole thing. The GDP of Israel is, and again, I never knew this, right? I don't know this. I've never looked it up. I don't know anything about this. I haven't thought about any of this stuff in years. I don't talk about it here, right? You guys know that. Know nothing about it, other than what I did before and, these various things I've said here. And I just knew this. GDP of Israel is $488 billion. Really, that's $500 billion, right? $500 billion. And the GDP of Palestine is $18 billion. And so, one is $500 billion, and the other one is not even 20 billion, right? So you understand the difference here. The GDP of Israel is 27 times greater. That's 100%, 27 times, 2,700%. Like you would need 27 of the Palestinian 18.4 billion to fit into the 48 billion of the Israel's GDP. So it's not even close. And then we're going to get into foreign aid here in a moment. So this is a poor area. This is like saying to say, a person of color who lives in the suburbs, you can go back to the tenement housing, right? Or in this case, the desert with tents and whatever, right? Where you can't grow food, you can't do anything. You're going to be harassed, and it's totally disingenuous on his part, right? Just a, absolute disaster for him.
And why is that? Why did they prefer to live in Israel? Because of the freedom of Israel.
Come on.
Because if you go to Palestine is a kleptocracy. Yasser Arafat died a billionaire. His wife is a billionaire. The people who run Hamas have $700 million. And we give $800 million a year to the Palestinian Authority. They use some of that money to pay people to kill Jews, civilians. So, and these are issues.
I'm gonna crush that in a second.
You may dispute with me, but you need to think about it.
You're wrong. You're just out and out wrong here. And at this part, you're out and out wrong. Are you saying that America is supporting the Palestinian government and Palestinian people in detriment to the Israeli people? Like, we all know that's complete BS, right? Like, this is something almost everybody knows, or they should. So this is a USA facts. Which countries receive the most foreign aid from the U.S.? And so the U.S. just gives money to foreign countries. And the ones that receive the most, five countries who receive over a quarter of all the U.S. foreign aid since World War II. Israel at $312 billion. And that doesn't count all the military aid and, just all of it. We've given them military equipment. They have benefited from the U.S. more than any other country. There is a very strong, powerful lobbying group for Israel, a few of them, more than one. They're considered the strongest or one of the strongest lobbying groups in Washington, D.C. And we know all that, right? That's stuff that he knows. Like, he knows that. So the second was Vietnam, which was to do with the Vietnam War. Egypt, and then Afghanistan to do with the Afghanistan War, and South Korea. And these are all countries that have military bases here. South Korea, certainly, and these countries that the U.S. has invested in one way or another. But Israel is by far the leader in U.S. aid. Now, I tried to see a comparison here in terms of the assistance. It said here that until February of 22, the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. foreign aid is $150 billion. Of course, that's not counting some of these other monies, right? And in terms of Palestinian aid, they're getting $500 million, right? And so they're not, and $417 million in humanitarian assistance, refugees and things like this. And that's not because they're mishandling their people and they have a horrible government. It's because they're occupied. This is an occupied country. Everybody knows it, except apparently Bobby. Even the rabbi next to him is probably going, can you believe this MNFer? Like, he's really buying into this BS. Like, and so, how much money has given the Palestinians? $344 million in 2022. And it's not just the aid, the money, because Israel gets all kinds of things from the United States. weaponry and all this other stuff, the military-industrial complex, the neocons. I mean, it's just ridiculous for him to say these things. Okay, there's a little bit more here. I got to wrap this thing up, but let's just do it here.
Civilians. So, and these are issues you may dispute with me, but you need to think about them. And, these are the issues that I talk to my kids about and that I want to talk to the Democratic Party about, because the current narrative about Israel is not an accurate narrative.
You say they're not getting enough love? Are you honestly saying Israel isn't getting enough love from America? I mean, it's, it's not just the money, but it's the movies and how many Holocaust movies are there and just all of it. Like, and I've said this here. If somebody puts a hateful comment up about Israel or Jews, I ban the person immediately. I don't want that energy on my channel. I don't want those people on my channel. And I also have said in the past, there are things that Jewish people have done, inventions, things with the economy. I mean, there's things that they've contributed, stuff to do with entertainment, stand-up comedy, things in Hollywood, all these things that people enjoy on a daily basis that you get from Jewish people, from Jewish culture. They've contributed things that you enjoy, even as an anti-Semitic, hateful, person that's hateful against Jewish people. And so you got to take the good with the bad. You can't take just the good and criticize the bad, right? Everybody's contributed something. Each group has contributed some things, and they've brought some negatives into our culture here, this mix of culture here in America, right? And so, I'm not whatever, you can see based in just my coverage of this here and my what I've done over the years, I'm not a hateful person to Jewish people. But come on, you're saying this whole narrative, everyone can criticize Israel.
Everybody can criticize Israel. That's not anti-Semitic. But if you criticize Israel and you are applying a different standard to Israel than to the countries around it, if you take the United Nations, passed last year something like, 50 or 60 resolutions against Israel, more than all of the other countries in the world combined.
Maybe that's because they're violating human rights there. The UN sucks. We don't like the UN here. We're all against the UN, right? Israel doesn't like the UN. But it's for completely different reasons, because the Palestinians are, they're in an abusive relationship. They don't have a voice. And you can say anything about them here in America, like I said, but you can't say things about Israel and Jewish people.
And yet, there are many, many countries that have really reprehensible human rights records, and they never get reprimanded by the UN. Oh, if you're holding Israel...
Again, he's promoting the victim consciousness.
Israel alone to this standard, and you don't hold nations to that standard that are much, much worse than Israel. And you have to wonder whether that is not anti-Semitism.
Just the fact this guy's applying like that.
Okay, I'm going home because I'm retired. Oh my gosh.
You can retire now.
Bobby Kennedy, if you're an anti-Semite, then I am funnier than Larry David. If you're an anti-Semite, then I am People Magazine's sexiest man alive. If you're an anti-Semite, then I really should just eat my yarmulke right now before the fast tomorrow. I'm very involved in trying to protect Israel. I have a son who's in the Israeli army right now. I have another son who served in the Israeli army. I have a daughter who served in the Israeli army. I don't think I have ever heard a major American political figure.
Okay, so this is what he said in the beginning, right? Bobby Kennedy showed you that in the beginning, what he's saying here, because all this was about him being accused of being an anti-Semite. And, he's going to get Jewish support over this, but he just torpedoed himself in the truth community. I mean, whatever support I give to him whatever I'm going to do in the future, I don't know what it is. I'm going to move over to the voiceover portion here. You know, I have no enthusiasm for this, right? For him, because he took away what made him special. He just undermined what made him special here. Pandering here, I mean, his ability to discern things, his ability to be fair in his judgment. I mean, is he basically saying he's going to cut off aid to Palestinian people because they're murderous towards Jewish people and not understanding the bigger picture? And again, this is not an issue for me. I don't talk about Israel. I don't talk about Palestine. People send me things all the time. They leave comments. I don't cover this. I don't follow this. I'm not interested in this from the perspective of we can't even fix our own country, and it's not, it is whatever it is. Like, I have compassion for all the people suffering around the world, but I can't help them, like, other than the idea of connecting to God internally and, the idea of a world based with spirituality as base in the future. But until the system comes down, there's going to be people suffering poverty, people suffering all of the horrors of war and the toxification of our planet and all the rest of it. And so this has nothing to do with Israel, nothing to do with even the Jewish lobby here and the stuff that like, I don't say things or talk about Israel or Jewish people here. I covered the stuff with Kyrie Irving that was a little bit different, but it's not my area of concern. And so it isn't that he disagrees with me on this or he is pro-Israel, because that would be fine. But what he did here was to go against, he says he's got a campaign of truth. And like, it was just, this guy said he could retire because Bobby Kennedy was such a cheerleader. I don't know if anybody else has gone even close to what Bobby Kennedy just did here. And, he was falsely accused of anti-Semitism instead of attacking he said things about the accusers and, the accusations, but, what he did, he just went all in on this thing in a way that's so greasy and uncomfortable for everyone who sees it. Like I said, either at the beginning of this video or an earlier video, that I think it was this video, that I don't believe there's a savior out there because the system isn't going to be saved. And I don't believe politicians are heroes. And I don't think RFK Jr. is a hero. I don't, I was enthusiastic about his interviews and the way he was presenting himself because he was a different candidate than we'd ever seen before. But I don't think he's going to change anything. Best case scenario, he gets elected and they harass him forever, both parties, and don't let him get anything done, right? Whatever happens. Like, I don't know. We don't know. And so he has had benefits to us, which I said in the beginning of this video, my last video. Already we see things that are happening because of his candidacy that are good things, that are, they're good things to cover here. They're bringing truth to light. They're, that we're going to see things go one way or another instead of waiting around for a resolution. He's certainly, a better candidate and a better person in terms of his interviews and how he's presented himself than any of these fake candidates, Trump and Biden and the rest of them. And so that doesn't change any of that, other than it undermines that to some extent. Like, he's just another person who's saying things here and, bowing down before Israel and the Jewish lobby or whatever. That's just fundamentally dishonest. And so I don't know where I'm going to go with this in the future. This is not like I'm going to wait and see. But right now I have very little enthusiasm for him and the way he's handled this. Like, he's failed. And he'd have to do something in a way, I don't know what he could do, right? Like, this is one of those things where I don't see him reversing his position. And he just went so far in, like, just, it was so bad. Like, that was 18 minutes, like, whatever his portion, 16 minutes of just, like, I can't believe, like, someone stopped the guy and take the microphone away from him. And the way his campaign has handled this. And, he needs the truth community. And he needs people who, all of us, because he doesn't have, he's considered a conspiracy theorist. And, again, I said we had nothing to lose by supporting him, and I kind of still feel like that, because what's the difference between him and anybody else? But you have to motivate people in the truth community who have all been hurt, and they're all, the left-right paradigm and all the things. Like, I'm not, I don't vote just to vote. Like, I don't participate in elections for a reason, because I don't want to waste my time. And, whatever he's done here, it's going to be hard for me to be enthusiastic about him in any way, and whatever. Like I said, you don't give politicians your heart. I'm not hurt by him, and he doesn't, like, in a sense, owe me anything. He doesn't owe us anything, right? But if he wants our support, you gotta. And again, he doesn't have to agree with everything I say or everything I think or everything I believe. I've said this before. And there's a huge litmus test in the truth community, which I talked about earlier. And truthers are just so hard to please. But this was a whopper, right? Like, what he did here, like, he just, wow. Like, wow, Bobby, wow. Anyways, only spirituality will save this world. It's paramount, definitely pouring for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.